Honourable members, the Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? The member for Kennedy.
Madam Speaker, the Silkwood Hotel in Far North Queensland was fined $1,600 because their decibel level was too high, the noise level in their pub. The hotel is a stone's throw from the clay pigeon shooting range down the road, and a stone's throw from Three Saints Festival, which is the biggest religious festival maybe in Australia, where 3,000 people attend. And of course, it very famously was where the Fields of Fire television series was filmed. But the petty attacks, and there is no doubt that Queensland is one of the least free states on earth. And I used my own family as an example, grandkids coming up. I said, oh, beauty, we get out the air rifles, set up the targets, with 10 acres outside of town. And my wife said, no, kids under 15 are not allowed to go near a rifle. What, an old 70-year-old air? No. All right, well, we'll set up the flying fox. Zoom, 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 splash in the pool. No, got to remove panel and to do that. But they won't come out here and inspect. No inspector was out last week, and our fence is 3 centimetres lower than it should be, so we're going to find $3,500 to fix the fence up. I said, all right, well, we'll complete the tree house. No, kid fell out of the tree house 2 months ago in Brisbane. Tree house is banned, right? Well, we go down the flat and boil the billy. We'll boil the billy and make some damper. And she said, no, you've got a permit for a fire in the open. Now, this is one of the most restrictive societies on earth. And every day and every week in this place, we put out more restrictions and more restrictions and more restrictions. I mean, who the hell do we think we are? Once upon a time, this was a very free country. And one of the great things about being an Australian is the freedoms that we enjoyed. If I get a taipan snake in my house, I am not allowed to kill the snake. And I'm not allowed to use a rifle to kill the snake. If my wife is being attacked with a knife, I'm not allowed to defend her or myself with a firearm. I mean, well, you ring the police. Well, the average downtime is about 70 minutes in Queensland. That's the average. My daughter had burglars in her apartment in Townsville, and they turned up 2 weeks later. She rang them 16 times because the burglar was in there and they could have caught him. So don't tell me about ringing up the police, right? But the most important principle outside of Christianity, love your neighbours, responsibility to other people, outside of that, the Magna Carta had the right of property, that on that little piece of land, I am the king. Not the government, my family and myself are the king.
The member for Chisholm.
Thanks so much, Deputy Speaker. Our government is strengthening Medicare by ensuring that all Australians have access to affordable primary care services when they need them. And I'm really excited to share that Chisholm now has a Medicare urgent care clinic. Medicare urgent care clinics are a game changer for communities around the country. Having a Medicare urgent care clinic located right in the heart of my electorate means locals can get the care they need and be on the mend quickly without paying a cent. The Chisholm Medicare urgent care clinic is fully bulk billed, which means that people in our community just need their Medicare card, not their credit card. It's important that people don't need to worry about costs to visit the urgent care clinic because it means they can instead focus on getting better soon and focus on their health. This clinic will help reduce the number of people attending the local emergency department for urgent but non-life-threatening conditions like sprains, infections, rashes, minor illnesses, burns or cuts. Over 40% of Medicare urgent care clinic presentations in Victoria have been outside standard business hours, which shows that the clinic is filling an important gap in services across extended hours and over the weekend, with the clinic open from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m, 7 days a week. Everyone from our community can walk in and get the urgent care they need, fully bulk billed, without waiting hours in a busy hospital emergency department. And I have already received really positive feedback from the Chisholm community about this news and their experiences. So I want to share the story of Chisholm local Michelle, who visited the Medicare urgent care clinic over the weekend. Michelle told me that she had a cough and a fever. She went to the urgent care clinic and was able to simply walk in and get attended to promptly and very kindly by a doctor that she described as amazing. And those opposite are laughing for some reason about the fact that we're really standing up universal healthcare in this country. Unbelievable. Michelle, though, was able to get a diagnosis and get treated. She was really grateful to be able to see a doctor in person so promptly. And she said she was thankful for the urgent care clinic in making her life easier. Her appointment was fully bulk billed, Deputy Speaker. I know what a positive impact this urgent care clinic will continue to have for our community in Chisholm and for people just like Michelle. The Albanese Labor government is working hard to strengthen Medicare and keep the cost of medicines down. We're freezing the cost of PBS prescriptions. We will always fight, and I will always fight, for affordable, accessible, quality healthcare for people in our Chisholm community. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The member for Casey.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, it's Men's Shed Week, and this year's theme is Send Him Down to the Shed. It's a fitting theme that encapsulates what men's sheds are all about. Heading down to the shed to enjoy some conversation, to meet some new mates, learn some new skills and keep the mind active. In Casey, we are fortunate to have 11 men's sheds, including the Morrison's Men's Shed in Mount Evelyn, Mooroolbark Men's Shed, Montrose and District's Men's Shed, Yarra Glen and District Men's Shed, the Monbulk District Men's Shed, Upways Men's Shed, Belgrave Men's Shed, the Badger Creek Men's Shed and District, as well as Ben's Shed in Yarra Junction and Bourne Men's Shed in Lilydale. I've been fortunate to visit most of these men's sheds in the past 2 years, and I've seen firsthand the value that they provide, not only to their members, but to the wider community. The minute you step foot inside a local men's shed, you can feel the camaraderie and the joy that they get from catching up and building things to support our community. I was recently at Monbulk Men's Shed where a member of the public came in and brought an old chair that had a broken leg. The men quickly came together with a plan to repair the chair. Not only do these sheds give men something to do when they have retired, but they are full of skills that help the wider community. Ben's Shed in Yarra Junction is another example. They run programs each semester for local school children to come and learn vital skills. Each and every men's shed across Casey spends time on projects that support local schools, toy libraries and our community. And they raise money for charity as well as running their own sheds. And last week, I was in my old hometown of Yarra Glen visiting the men's shed, the Secretary Ross and the team there. And I'm looking forward to joining them on the barbecue at Bunnings on Grand Final Friday as one of their main fundraisers for the year. Now, these fundraisers provide important funds to fuel their outings, equipment and tools that allow them to keep busy and support the community. And everyone in Mooroolbark knows every second Saturday you've got to go down to Coles to grab a sausage from the Mooroolbark Men's Shed. The Montrose Men's Shed will always be found at the Montrose Market, much like the Upway Men's Shed, which are at the Upway Market. I had a wonderful conversation with them a few weeks ago, and we're very close, hopefully, Deputy Speaker, to getting a new home for the Upway Men's Shed, and I've been really proud to support them over the last 2.5 years as they continue to advocate for the new home that they deserve. I was proud to commit money in the last election to the Belgrave Men's Shed so they could get a new home. I'll continue to advocate for them and all the men's sheds across Casey because they do such a great job for our community.
The member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Bellarine-based business Adelia Fine Foods is the latest local recipient of our energy efficiency grants. These grants are all part of the Albanese government's program to support small business, reduce operational costs, reduce emissions and act on climate change. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the business owners, husband and wife team, Adam and Amelia, on receiving funding of more than $24,000 to upgrade their food processing machinery. Amelia said the business is investing in a new energy-efficient automisation process for the tempering and finishing of chocolate for its Rocky Road range of gluten-free treats, and they are good. An upgrade that will reduce power consumption by 50%. Amelia said, and I quote, "With the support of this grant, we're excited to take this important step towards greater energy efficiency in our operations." Deputy Speaker, Amelia also told me that her business's incredible journey from humble beginnings to the iconic local brand it is today is so significant for her. Adelia started life as a hobby with 5 varieties of granola, selling at weekend markets around the Bellarine Peninsula and the Surf Coast, whilst Adam and Amelia kept working full-time jobs. Adelia remained a home-based business for 3 years, but as sales surged and demand grew, Adam and Amelia took the plunge and moved into a warehouse in Ocean Grove, before moving into an even bigger facility earlier this year. And from there, Deputy Speaker, the business has continued to grow, to reach new heights and employ more locals in rewarding work. I was lucky enough to experience the work they do behind the scenes, making their amazing food, and without giving too much away, it's like walking into a Willy Wonka's factory, but with an absolute focus on nutrition. Deputy Speaker, Adelia is now the second recipient I visited as part of the latest round of the energy efficiency grants, with Bell's Beach Brewing in Torquay also receiving funding. Round 2 supported over 1,700 small and medium-sized businesses with $41.2 million in grants. There are so many businesses across my region who are doing amazing things, small businesses that have grown from kitchen bench hobbies into regional juggernauts, small businesses that have taken a bright, innovative concept and turned it into a viable commodity, growing jobs and pride in our region. And our energy efficiency grants are supporting these businesses, empowering them to take control of their power bills whilst keeping an absolute focus on sustainability. Deputy Speaker, these grants are good for the environment, good for business, and a great result for my electorate of Corangamite.
Thank you. The member for Ford.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, just a few weeks ago, I stood here and proudly spoke about the support for our Olympians, and how my electorate of Ford and our city of Logan have produced several stars, gold medal winners in fact. Now it's our Paralympians who deserve the respect and plaudits of this House. I reiterate something that I said in this House before. I take immense pride in being a member of the Parliamentary Friends of the Olympics and Paralympic movement, and I'm pleased to co-chair that with my good friend, the member for Moreton. I was just as proud to see the Paralympians from the Logan region don the green and gold. And sadly, another Olympics and Paralympics has now gone by. And we look forward to Los Angeles up next, and then it will be our turn in Brisbane to showcase what we have to offer in the wonderful Sunshine State. But I want to focus on the here and now and the 3 incredible women representing the Logan region at the Paris Paralympics. Deputy Speaker, Logan Village mum of 2, AJ Jennings, Meadowbrook's Natalie Smith and Logan-born Samantha Schmidt have all done our region proud. AJ, along with the mixed team recurve open para-archery partner Tamon Kenton Smith, quickly became crowd favourites. Their campaign came to a dramatic close as they faced off against the Indians in the elimination stages. In a tense and nail-biting shoot-off, it came down to the final 2 arrows, with the Indian pair holding their nerve and delivered the decisive shots for victory, or to secure victory. No matter the outcome, the Logan Village Paralympians should absolutely hold their head high on their tremendous achievements. Though disappointed by the campaign's end, Jennings expressed a sense of anticipation for future challenges. It's a shame it's finished because I enjoyed it just so much. but it just makes us hungrier for the next one, Jennings told the media. And I look forward to cheering her on in LA in 2028. As well as Ms Jennings, parachuter Natalie Smith shone. She equalled her best Paralympic result in the R8 women's 50-metre rifle, 3 positions SH1, making the final and placing 8th overall in a fiercely competitive field. The rewarding result capped off Smith's 2024 Paris campaign after placing 12th in the R2 women's 10-metre air rifle standing SH1. Logan thrower Samantha Schmidt, who holds the Australian para records in discus shot put in javelin in her F38 class, finished 7th in the women's discus. I want to thank our Olympians, but also incredibly proudly for our Paralympians over the past couple of weeks for their incredible representation of our nation on the global stage. We should be all very proud of their achievements.
Thank you. The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the important funding announcement made by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Women last week to address gender-based violence. The Albanese government will invest a total of $4.7 billion in new funding to combat gender-based violence and implement the recommendations from the rapid review into prevention approaches. This includes investing in frontline services and initiatives aimed at preventing violence. This will have a significant impact on my community of Dunkley. Shockingly, the rate of family violence incidents in the Frankston local government area rose by 17.1% in 2023. The family violence rate per 100,000 was the highest it's been in 5 years. And no surprises, it was women who are disproportionately affected by the violence. I have spent the last 15 years of my career working for and with women and children fleeing domestic and family violence. I have seen firsthand the devastating impact of domestic violence. That is why I established the Women's Spirit Project to support these women in my community of Dunkley, to recover and prevent them from returning to abusive relationships. This government knows gender-based violence is a scourge on our community. This funding will take important steps to prevent violence. $3.9 billion will be invested in frontline legal assistance services through a national access to justice partnership with states and territories, addressing the funding shortfall left by the previous government. This will result in an essential increase of nearly $800 million over 5 years, starting in 2025-26. It will focus on supporting legal services that provide women fleeing gender-based violence, such as Peninsula Community Legal Service and the team led by Jackie Galloway, who deliver crucial services in my electorate of Dunkley. The funding also covers indexation and supports pay parity in the sector. A total of $351 million will be provided over 5 years from 2025 for a renewed national partnership agreement on family, domestic and sexual violence responses, which will fund frontline services. This amount will be matched by contributions from states and territories. Importantly, this will be coordinated with the states and territories to ensure we have a national approach. As the Prime Minister said, a nationally coordinated approach is required to address this national crisis. There is always more work to do, but this is an important step.
Thank you. The member for Dawson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Today, farmers from across Australia descended on Canberra with a powerful message for the Albanese Labor government. If you have no farmers, you have no food. As a farmer by trade, watching the havoc that this government has unleashed on the hard-working Aussies who keep our nation fed and clothed is gut-wrenching. And I have one thing to say to the Prime Minister. This isn't political, this is personal. In the last 2 years, this government has ripped thousands of hectares of prime agricultural land away for wind and solar farms, created mandatory emissions reporting when the science to calculate this doesn't even exist, increased taxes, denying farmers access to critical workforces, introduced the fresh food tax, increased taxes on superannuation, introduce the family car and ute tax, axe the agricultural visa, shut down live sheep export and trade. And make no mistake about it, they'll be coming for our live cattle next. When you look back, it's clear that the Albanese Labor government crucify farmers at every opportunity. Anyone who has worked the land will know that farming is not just a job. It is a core part of our identity and purpose. It isn't in our blood, it is our blood. Without farmers, our rural and regional communities simply don't exist. The local school doesn't survive. The supermarket doesn't survive. Local businesses don't survive. Your kids simply do not have jobs. It's not just the economic toll. The mental anguish these decisions are having on our farmers is real. Deputy Speaker, it's been over 40 years since farmers last protested against the government. There is a better way. A coalition government will reinstate the live sheep export trade, bring back the agricultural visa, legislate that the 88-day backpacker visa remains in place for the agricultural sector, introduce a container levy so our farmers don't pay for the biosecurity risks of our overseas competitors, reverse Labor's cuts to regional infrastructure, stop Labor's truckie and vehicle efficiency standard tax, make nuclear energy a part of our energy mix, scrap harmful emission profiles, stop Labor's proposed taxes on superannuation. I want every Australian farmer to know that the Coalition are listening. We are hearing you. Farmers get blamed for every climate change argument under the sun by Labor, Greens and the Teals. Enough is enough. As a federal member for Dawson and as a proud farmer, I stand shoulder to shoulder with our farmers. Without farmers, we'll be all naked, starving and sober.
Thank you. The member for McMahon.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable members and the whole House would have watched with great concern the episodes in Bangladesh over recent months, the fall of the government, violence, and our thoughts are with all Bangladeshis at this very difficult time. But I do particularly want to make reference to the violence and the plight of ethnic and religious minorities in Bangladesh and to raise some matters for the House. Now, recently there was a briefing of members of Parliament which I participated in online. Also Dr Charlton, Dr Freelander and Stanley, Mr Thistlethwaite, representatives of Minister Husic and Minister Rowland's office, which was organised by Councillor Suman Sahar of Cumberland City Council and 46 leaders of the Bangladeshi community that raised issues, and we're also joined by 3 members of the families of victims of violence in Bangladesh over recent months. Now, obviously, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are very complex matters at play, and not every report at all times will be accurate, but nevertheless I'm satisfied that there are genuine issues and have been genuine issues that need to be addressed, and genuine issues were raised in this meeting. 725 homes and businesses damaged, 724 homes and businesses looted, 58 homes and businesses set on fire, 17 places of worship damaged, 21 places of worship looted. And included in these statistics are human stories. It's reported that Rahul Ananda's home has been looted and set on fire. Now, I'm told that Rahul's home was host to cultural vibrance and community. Rahul's a very famous musician in the Bangladeshi community, and his house has previously been visited by President Macron of France. But since the attack, Rahul has been forced to flee Bangladesh. And this is one of the many stories during this tragedy. So, all violence is to be abhorred. Minister Wong has made it clear that we want a restoration of stability in Bangladesh, and I do recognise the efforts of the new government led by Muhammad Yunus. And as I said at the outset, all violence for all Bangladeshis is to be deplored. But I did want to take this opportunity to raise the particular matter of attacks on religious and ethnic minorities in Bangladesh, Hindus, Christians and others. And to say that I have written, together with other Western Sydney colleagues, to Minister Wong raising this issue. We'll continue to raise these concerns. I know our representatives in Bangladesh have been actively ensuring that Australia's views about the need for a return to stability and lack of violence are represented. There has been violence against these minorities in the past, particularly 2021 during the Durga Puja, but I did want to take this opportunity to raise this very important matter for the information of the House and to assure Bangladeshis who are ethnic minorities that the House is watching and listening.
Thank you. The member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I quote, "Nothing will take away what it does to a person to literally sign a piece of paper to say they will go anywhere at any time and do anything, including sacrificing their own life in the defence of our country. And then for that country to turn around and say to them they are not worth anything to them broken, not worth anything to them injured. They see me as nothing." Deputy Speaker, they are the opening 4 sentences of the report that was released yesterday, being the final report of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide. And that is a comment that was taken by somebody unnamed. It's the quotes attributed to an ex-serving Air Force member. The report that was handed down yesterday, Deputy Speaker, consists of 7 volumes, 122 recommendations, over 5,800 submissions. The Royal Commission was for more than 3 years' work. Thousands of painful submissions discussing suicidality among serving and ex-serving members of our Defence Force. There are 89,395 current serving permanent and reserve members of our Defence Forces. More than 6,000 Australians enlist in the Australian Defence Force on average each year. More than 500,000 living Australians have served or are currently serving in the ADF. And I acknowledge and thank all of the men and women serving in our Defence Forces, former veterans and particularly their families. And particularly, Deputy Speaker, as a member for Hughes, I acknowledge all Defence Force personnel at Holsworthy Barracks in my electorate, as well as the RSL sub-branches that support them: Bundeena, Engadine, Heathcote, Warrenora River, Ingleburn, City of Campbelltown and City of Liverpool. So the report that was handed down yesterday highlighted one very important thing, Deputy Speaker, among many. There has been no sustained reduction in the high rates of suicide and suicidality among serving and ex-serving ADF members over the last 20 years. That is simply not good enough, but this report is the beginning of us righting this. This report is an indication that we have started down the correct path. Deputy Speaker, our job in Parliament is to work together across the chamber to ensure that we put in policies and legislation so that going into the future we will be resolute. We will ensure that never again will serving and existing ADF members feel they are not worth anything broken. I also want us to let us embrace the comments of RSL New South Wales to ensure that veterans' wellbeing is supported from the first day they enter service onwards. Deputy Speaker, let us work together. Let us ensure that never again do those who sign up to go anywhere at any time, to do anything, including sacrificing their own lives, feel worthless and take their own life. Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Watson.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. It's the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of Australia. The Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of Australia was founded by Patriarch Gregory the 7th of Constantinople in 1924 and has established many religious, cultural and social welfare initiatives, many of which provide essential services in my part of Sydney. The establishment of Greek Orthodox Archdiocese schools in New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia and South Australia, St Basil's homes, which have been instituted in every capital city since 1969, caring for older members of the community as well as delivering a variety of community and in-home care programs. The Estia Foundation of Australia, which offers respite to those caring for children and adults with disabilities in its Roselands facilities, and permanent and group home accommodation in Gladesville, North Ryde and Blakehurst. Parish-run organisations across Australia hosting a number of activities which include pastoral programs, childcare centres, Greek language school and meals for the poor. Greek welfare centres around Australia, which cater for the various needs of our most vulnerable. Establishment of monasteries in New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia and South Australia, and the establishment of St Andrew's Greek Orthodox Theological College. I particularly want to congratulate His Eminence Archbishop Makarios, Primate of the Greek Orthodox Church in Australia, on this 100th anniversary and for his extraordinary leadership to his congregation since arriving in Australia in June 2019.
Thank you. In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded, and I call the clerk.
Government business. Next order of the day. National Health Amendment, technical changes to averaging price disclosure threshold and other matters, Bill 2024, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Forrest.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on this National Health Amendment Bill because in part it reflects on the importance of the stockholding requirements. And we've seen severe medicine shortages that are occurring under the Labor government's watch. The recent shortage of saline IV fluids in Australia has posed a serious risk to a lot of our healthcare system. Saline IV bags are absolutely critical to the emergency healthcare provided to patients in Australian hospitals, but doctors around in every hospital around our nation have been told to ration the amount they use for patients. This is not okay. The government's been aware of this, and Minister Gallagher admitted that the government had been aware of this impending shortage for over a year. So this is a real problem in Australia. The government's had more than 12 months' notice of this impending shortage, but no other country has had these same issues. But the problems in rural and regional areas where we live and work is even worse. I spoke to Rowan Lowe, who's not only a pharmacist in Donnybrook, a small regional community in my electorate, but he's also the National Pharmacist of the Year for 2024. And he wanted to talk to, I asked him about the shortages in rural and regional, and he said these are impacting, of course, on regional patients. These are Rowan's own words. And he said one of the biggest experience that we still experience on a weekly basis is that prescribers are not communicated with medication shortages and then send the patient off with a prescription that they're unable to fill. The pharmacy then has to reach out to the prescriber, the patient has to wait longer for their medication, and if the prescriber does not get back to us, that's their pharmacy, in time, the wait time can be extended due to the order cut-off times. He said, we had an example last week of a patient being discharged from Busselton Hospital with critical pain medication post-surgery. The prescriber was contacted 3 times and did not call back. The patient was in pain for 24 hours until myself, as the pharmacist, went directly to the local GP clinic and used my relationship with the GP to source some alternative pain medication for the patient. There needs to be more up-to-date resource for all prescribers to access that shows the stock availability in their regional areas. He went on to say local GPs are currently experiencing high workloads and long wait times for appointments. Therefore, trying to follow up with them regarding medication shortages is becoming more difficult, with the patients being the ones who are being disadvantaged the most. If we were able to have some point of truth that was live and up to date, that would be a real bonus for these pharmacists and for the patients. He said current medication shortages that impact patients, and some may be WA-based, but amoxicillin, and patients are having to be switched to a different dosage, which means double the volume, decreased compliance with children, and also longer wait times while we call the prescriber to have the changes approved. That's what Rowan said. Exemptamide. He said the combination of product went out of stock, and that has seen the individual products now also go out of stock. He said we are then having to send patients back to their GP for a review as to what path to take with their treatment, which is taking more GP appointments that are currently hard to come by. He spoke of Duodart. It's been unavailable for almost 2 months and is used for benign prostatic hyperplasia. Not life-critical, but for many males can create social implications and fears when they're not able to obtain this. The individual drugs in this medication are not available on the PBS, so the pharmacist, as he said, we are unable to switch and the patients must go without treatment due to cost. Rowan then went on to say with Ozempic, this is a well-known shortage, however, has become easier, but again now has been put on restrictions from the wholesaler in which we're only able to order 1 pen per week to cover our 40 diabetic patients per month that are currently on the medication. The release of the new Wegovy is theoretically meant to ease the pressure on Ozempic. However, we do not see this occurring as the price of Wegovy is so much higher than Ozempic, so we still see patients wanting Ozempic over Wegovy. This is what's happening in regional Australia. He spoke about Vyvanse. This medication has had supply issues for the majority of 2024, and the complexity around seeking alternative treatments is extremely complicated as the medication is a Schedule 8 and prescribed through specialists who are often the most difficult to get in contact with in my southwest. Again, patients then having to go without medication, decreasing compliance. Also increasing significantly the workloads on pharmacy teams to manage these patients, stock supply, and be a middleman for communication between the specialist and the patient. He also spoke about Ordine liquid. The medication is often used for palliative care and is now discontinued. Shortages and discontinued. He then spoke of hormone replacement therapy. He said this is a continual issue in the industry and one that we see the highest rates of non-compliance due to unavailability of patients having to use products that are not effective because it is the best option available. He said ordering of stock is often also a logistic issue in regional areas, and we see a lack of understanding in this place for what actually happens in the regions. Rowan said, if we receive a prescription for a medication at 1:05 p.m. on a Friday, we're actually not able to have that medication delivered in store till the following Tuesday, as we are a regional area. No wonder people in the regions have a lesser health outcome. That is a 96-hour wait for a medication which for me, said Rowan, is unacceptable. He's the pharmacist. To help our patient base, we choose to hold a higher stock on hand value, which comes at a cost to the business, cash flow, and for him as the owner, all to help us to service our community, something that metro businesses don't even have to think about. Also being in WA, we experience higher number of stock outs and longer stock outs than other states within Australia. Another reason why we hold higher stock values, and I know that the wholesalers also hold higher stock values in WA. If a product is out of stock, particularly popular items, we may have to send that patient to Bunbury, which is an hour return trip when they are sick or unwell, to source a medication. That's in the southwest of WA. In our store in Dongra in WA, the same situation occurs, and we may need to send a patient on a 2-hour return trip for the same reason. These examples also add to the cost of living pressures, with patients then having to add the cost of fuel to sourcing medication, and being regional, those drives can be much further, of course, than in metro areas. This is the reality for those of us who live and work in regional Australia. It is not acceptable. This situation, as Rowan has said, is extremely common, and as much as we move mountains to ensure that our patients don't have to drive or wait 96 hours, more often than not, it has to occur. Rowan is the Pharmacist of the Year. He is an exceptional pharmacist. He goes above and beyond for what he provides to his patients and his people. Rowan went on to say, we also see that pharmacists acting in full scope in regional areas as a great solution to parts of this issue, as pharmacists would be authorised to make therapeutic substitutions. This would alleviate the pressure on pharmacy to contact the GP, patients having to wait for the GP to return a call, as often they cannot talk as they are in an appointment. GPs are very busy in regional areas, and the pharmacist would have full visibility of what is available at wholesalers. He went on to say medication misadventure is another issue that occurs, as often a drug might not be out of stock. However, stock might be extremely low, and each pharmacy is having to grab whichever brand it can find to ensure their patients will have continuity of supply. Now, they're the comments that I got from Rowan Lowe, who is, as I said, the Australian Pharmacist of the Year, who has a practice in Donnybrook in my electorate. Rowan went on to say, this is a daily issue and we have to be very cautious as we are always having to brand swap due to stock availability. And this drives confusion for the patient, and often a patient then takes 2 brands of the same medication. Often in WA, we are not completely out of stock, but we are frequently having to brand swap. So what this says to me is not only is this making the challenge for pharmacists in rural and regional Australia and the more remote parts more and more difficult, but it says to me that the government has a job to do in this space. To actually have those medications available for those pharmacists to be able to dispense when the GP actually writes out a prescription. Surely it's not too much to ask. And as we all know, the health outcomes for people in regional Australia, regional and more remote Australia, is far worse than what we see in cities. Surely this is one of the contributing factors. But unfortunately, what we see here is not enough focus on rural and regional Australia and its needs compared to others as we see in the metro areas. Those health outcomes, this is a very practical example. And should anyone from the government or from the department want to talk to Rowan about what's happening for practical purposes on the ground, can I really encourage you to do so? It should be all of us in this place whose job it is to make sure that it shouldn't matter where you live in this country. Your postcode should not be the determinant of the health outcomes that you have access to and the medications that you have access to. But that's what we've got. Here's the evidence. And I'm calling on the government and anyone here from the department to take me up on this offer to talk to Rowan and perhaps some other rural and regional pharmacists, not people based in Canberra or based in a city. Why not talk to the pharmacists who have to live and work with this day in and day out? How do you think they feel when they cannot prescribe and actually hand over the counter, dispense what the local people need? And you need to remember, our pharmacists live and work with us as families. And when we walk in their door, they know our history, they know what we are predisposed to. We rely on them as part of, often, the only medical treatment. We're living with a lot of communities now because of changes that the government has made. We've seen a flight of GPs out of regional and remote areas. There's not GPs in every community like there were because the overseas trained doctors can now practice in out of metro. Chasing the dollar. That's exactly right. So we rely then on our pharmacists. Often, if there is a pharmacist in our community, they're the ones we rely on, but they need the medications to be able to dispense, irrespective of where that prescription comes from, wherever that GP is that prescribes. We need them to be able to access those medications. So, in my contribution to this, Deputy Speaker, I'd just like to finish by encouraging, I'm happy, and I know Rowan would be very happy to talk to anyone in the government or anyone from the department to give a practical view on what is actually happening to the pharmacists and the issue for the patients and our people in rural and regional Australia. I refuse to accept that it's okay for the people who live in rural and regional and more remote parts of Australia that they cannot have access to the medications they need compared to others. That is not okay by any standard.
Thank you. If there are no further speakers, we'll put the question. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. I'll call the clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the National Health Act 1953 and for related purposes.
If no member wishes to consider the bill in detail, I will put the report question immediately. The question is that this bill be reported to the House without amendment. All in favour say aye. Against no. The ayes have it. And I call the clerk.
Government business, next order of the day. Administrative Review Tribunal, Miscellaneous Measures Bill 2024, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on the Administrative Review Tribunal Miscellaneous Measures Bill 2024, which completes the Albanese Labor government's legislative package of reforms necessary to abolish the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and replace it with a new and improved body. The history of the AAT goes back a long way, and its jurisdiction is quite significant. There's no general jurisdiction, hasn't been for the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. It goes back to when it was first created and started operating in 1976, really a creation of the Whitlam government before that. The jurisdiction is not given by a separate piece of legislation, but by the various acts of parliament that we pass in this place. And there are 400 acts of parliament which actually gave the AAT jurisdiction. The AAT is an important body. It's a new body, the ART, which is taking over its responsibilities, has the power to affirm, to vary, set aside and substitute decisions. Independent decision-making, merits review, de novo. The AAT is not restricted to the evidence that was before the original decision-maker. So it's got a very varied jurisdiction, but it's not a court, it's a tribunal. So its decisions are published, of course, so it helps in terms of the jurisprudence, but it covers a whole range of areas that the Australian public will come in contact with, such as child support, what we used to call Centrelink, migration, taxation, veterans entitlements, workers' compensation and the like. The Administrative Review Tribunal, or ART legislative package, gave effect to the government's commitment to establish a new Administrative Review Tribunal that's more efficient, user-friendly, accessible, picks up the good things of the AAT, independent and fair, but doesn't have the problems that were created under the previous government's watch. This miscellaneous bill supports the establishment of the new ART by the Administrative Review Tribunal Act of 2024. The previous Act, given royal assent on the 3rd of June this year, commencing on the 14th of October. The additional two Acts contain consequential and transitional amendments to 248 Commonwealth Acts, and they've received royal assent. So you can see the breadth of impact on our jurisprudence and our legislative framework from the Commonwealth's point of view, simply by that legislation that was passed and by this consequential and miscellaneous legislation. Now, Bill creates a new system that's fair and reasonable, fair and just, timely, accessible and responsive to people's diverse needs. So there'll be improved transparency and quality of decision-making. It promotes public trust and confidence in the ART, and it completes the establishment of the tribunal. The amendments are largely procedural and technical. There's changes to 52 Acts to update references to the AAT in legislation that have been passed and introduced to Parliament since the ART Act. Some technical amendments to support the efficient conduct of the tribunal review and ensure the legislation operates as it's intended by the government. The bill is necessary. This one we're debating today can only be introduced following the passage of the ART due to the volume and complexity of interactions between the ART Act and other pieces of common legislation. There's some minor changes to the ART Act to improve the user experience, and the Act's intended operation is pretty clear. So I'll just briefly go through it, but it's a demonstration, I think, of the government's commitment to the bedrock of a democratic system and a federal system of administrative review, which I pay tribute to Gough Whitlam about, because its genesis comes back to the days of Whitlam and, of course, Lionel Murphy. So that harks back to those days. And we're trying to get back to those days and what the AAT originally was intended to be, not how it was effectively changed and I call it prostituted by the previous government's appointments. The amendments in this legislation exclude a period of time over the Christmas period and the calculation of the 28-day period in relation to which a party can appeal. It makes sense, frankly, over from the 24th of December to the 14th of January. It's a practical and disadvantaged situation for anyone appealing in that time. There's some enables practice directions, which is very common, by the way, in any court system, practice directions, and also allows the president, because of course you've got a president and a deputy president and senior members and members in the ART, and allows the president of the ART to create these practice directions that allow the efficient operation of how a court system, or a tribunal in this case, would operate. So it ensures the management requirements and practical implication of how to manage caseloads, and the ART is going to have a huge caseload. It amends authorisations to ensure the decisions of the National Archives of Australia relate to access to certain national security records, and ensures, by the way, that amendments to the Intelligence Services Legislation Amendment are reflected in the new tribunal, which again makes sense as well. Ensures that the Attorney-General can delegate power to authorise the payment of costs or grant legal or financial assistance to officers in their department, and cost orders are integral to any tribunal. Under the Law Officers Act of 1964, noting the significant administrative burden that work will be associated with these functions. There's clarification where an applicant's no longer able to continue with an application, and that often happens when someone's bankrupt or they're the company's in liquidation or there's a death. A person can only continue the proceedings if they would have been able to apply for the review in the first place, which makes it's common sense as well. And by the way, it's consistent with other areas of law. There's some technical amendments to clarify the operation of the ART, which are consistent with the intention of the original legislation. In addition to these amendments, the bill makes some minor amendments to other laws. There's some amendments that update terminology and cross-references. It removes specific provisions that duplicate ART timeframes to apply for various reviews of deemed decisions, and some standardisation of frameworks. We're ensuring that the proceedings which is going on before the Guidance and Appeals Tribunal and original decision-making that may not alter the decision under review without the tribunal's visibility, and that makes sense. If the decision-maker makes a decision and then someone seeks a review of that original decision, you don't want to let that original decision-maker to then be in a position to change that around before the ART makes a decision. That's simply a matter of justice and fairness and transparency and integrity in the process. The bill makes some amendments across several portfolios to ensure that legislation operates as intended, certainly removing time limits for seeking internal and tribunal review for Aboriginal Study Grant Scheme, assistance for isolated children decisions, amends the Migration Act, and this will be a very big part of the ART's jurisdiction, because it was under the AAT, that is my area of migration. It's clarifying that the application is not valid and therefore does not enliven the tribunal's jurisdiction unless it's properly made, which does not change existing requirements but ensure the applicant can easily identify in the face of legislation that they are required to make a valid application. There's an amendment to the Crimes Act to provide that tribunal members nominated to issue post-entry and delayed notification search warrants with the same impunity and protection as tribunals who are nominated to exercise similar functions under the Crimes Act. When it comes to funding, we've provided $206.5 million over 4 years for the ART in the 2024-25 budget, and the funding will ensure the new tribunal is supported by a demand-driven, sustainable model providing timely decision-making. The funding package also includes $9.6 million to provide improved access to merits-based review for regional, rural and remote communities, as well as a user experience and accessibility team and a pilot First Nations liaison officer program, which I think is terrific, by the way. That's a great idea. This funding builds on our $128 million commitment in previous budgets to tackle the previous AAT's substantial backlog. Deputy Speaker, the bill completes the package of reforms, I say. It's about restoring trust and confidence in our system of administrative review. Tens of thousands of people rely on the AAT every year to independently review decision-making. The reality is that the previous coalition government fatally compromised the AAT, undermining its independence and eroding quality and efficiency of decision-making. Yet the irony of the whole thing was that they constantly, having appointed all these people to the AAT, then railed against the decision-making that was being made. The AAT's public standing was irreversibly damaged as a result of the coalition's appointment of as many as 85 former Liberal MPs, failed Liberal candidates, former Liberal staffers and other close Liberal associates without any merits-based selection process at all. Many of these appointees possessed no relevant experience or expertise, and some of them were active lobbyists. In recent years, the Centre for Public Integrity board member Geoffrey Watson SC has said the damage to the AAT was too extensive to just replace existing members over several years, so it was really necessary to start from scratch with a whole new body, which is what we're doing here with this legislation. Mr Watson has been very supportive of the government's approach, which he has argued would ensure and restore integrity, openness and accountability and allow it to function independently of politics. That said, the problems of the AAT extend well beyond the absence of a merit-based selection process in the former coalition government. We inherited an AAT that was not on a sustainable financial footing, but set by delays and extraordinarily large and growing backlog of applications, was operating multiple and ageing electronic management systems. This is a legacy of the former government's mismanagement of the AAT, with the Social Security Appeals Tribunal and the Migration Review Tribunal and the Refugee Review Tribunal. An inefficient, ineffective administrative review system comes at a real cost to the taxpayers and the citizens of this country. These Australians were abandoned by the former government. As the Robodebt Royal Commissioner said in the Royal Commission, effective merits review is an essential part of the legal framework that protects the rights and interests of individuals. It also promotes government accountability and plays a broad, important role in improving quality and consistency of government decision-making. We're fixing up a mess that we inherited, and many people would directly benefit from the government's reform package. This is one of the most important legislative legal legacies in decades that we'll leave in this government. It's one of the things that Attorney General Mark Dreyfus will be really known for in the future as a reforming Attorney General. Through these reforms, we are seeking to restore integrity, trust and confidence. The new tribunal will build on the 50 years of experience. Our package of reforms implement all 3 recommendations from the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Reference Committee review into the performance and integrity of Australia's administrative review system, 4 recommendations from the Royal Commission into the Robodebt scheme, and the government's response to 2 recommendations from the rapid review into the exploitation of Australia's visa system. In particular, legislation was informed by extensive stakeholder consultation, including guidance from an expert advisory group led by former High Court Justice, the Honourable Patrick Keane, ACKC, and engagement over many months with AAT staff and members, AAT users, peak bodies, legal assistance providers, advocates and other experts. Despite all of this, to the utter shame of the opposition, they voted against these reforms, demonstrating its ongoing commitment to use the AAT as a job agency for Liberal and National Party mates at the expense of the Australian public. A central feature of the new ART is a transparent and merit-based selection process for the appointment of non-judicial members. Existing non-judicial members of the AAT, and many of whom continue to embody the best traditions of the once celebrated institution, have been invited to apply for positions in the new body in accordance with the process. I note the government's announced a number of appointments to the existing AAT and the new ART recently. This will ensure that the AAT maintains capacity to hear matters in the period prior to the commencement of the new ART. The new AAT members will then transition to the new ART when it commences on the 14th of October for the remainder of their terms, and each appointee was assessed as suitable for appointment by an independent assessment panel through a transparent and merit-based process conducted in accordance with the guidelines for appointments to the AAT and the transitional provisions in the Administrative Review Tribunal Consequential and Transitional Provisions, No. 1 Act 2024. I congratulate each of these members on their appointment, and I thank the Attorney-General for this landmark reform and his long-standing commitment to law reform and building trust in government and public institutions. This bill completes a package of reforms that establish a new Administrative Review Tribunal and reflects the ongoing commitment of this government to reforming Australia's system of administrative review, and I commend the bill to the House.
I call the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to make my contribution to the Administrative Review Tribunal Miscellaneous Measures Bill 2024. The bill represents the culmination of a reform package that abolishes the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. The ART will commence on the 14th of October 2024. As a result, this bill attracts a time-critical status. Whilst it's preferable this bill commences at the same time as the entire legislative package, it will not significantly impact upon the operations of the ART if it occurs a short time after commencement. The bill seeks to amend 52 pieces of legislation to make technical amendments to ensure that the ART operates as intended. The bill aims to improve the ART's operation for citizens applying to the tribunal, excluding the period between the 24th of December and the 14th of January from the 28-day period in which appeals to the Federal Court can be made. Clarifying that practice directions can specify an alternate time frame for decision makers to provide the tribunal with additional documents. Amending authorisation so that persons exercising powers and functions of the tribunal, intelligence and security jurisdiction are of an appropriate level of seniority and experience. Ensuring that the Attorney-General can delegate the power to authorise the payment of costs or grant legal or financial assistance to officers in their department, and clarifying when an applicant is no longer able to continue with an application for review of a decision for reasons such as death or bankruptcy or liquidation, and another person may only apply to continue the proceedings if they would have been able to apply for the review of the substantive decision. The reconstruction of the AAT as the ART was an essential reform carried out by the Albanese Labor government as a result of the abject failure of the former coalition government to ensure a fully functioning apolitical tribunal. So fatally compromised was the AAT by almost a decade of coalition political stacking meant that our government had to take action to entirely reconstruct the tribunal. There's been a long history of blatant political appointments to the AAT. In February 2019, former Coalition Minister Christian Porter made 34 appointments to the AAT, 19 of which were Liberal Party advisors, candidates or former members of Parliament. In April 22, just prior to the last federal election and prior to entering caretaker mode, former Coalition Minister Michaelia Cash made 19 appointments to the AAT, 6 of which were Liberal Party advisors, candidates or former members of Parliament. This included a former New South Wales Liberal Minister, biographer of John Howard, 2 former WA State Liberal MPs who had just lost their seat in the March 22 WA election, and 3 advisors to former coalition ministers. Between 2019 and 2022, 40% of the appointments had political backgrounds. Under Howard, Rudd and Gillard governments, the figure was in the order of 5 or 6%. It would seem that the former government saw the purpose of the AAT as a retirement village rather than a key institution of democracy and our legal system. With so many influential former colleagues appointed to the AAT, it is no surprise that the coalition, now in opposition, voted against this package of reforms. It's also no surprise that the government of robo-debt, colour-coded spreadsheets and general administrative chaos left the Albanese Labor government and AAT that it was not on a sustainable footing, and an AAT that was beset by delays with an extraordinary large backlog of applications. An AAT that had independence fundamentally undermined and a quality and efficiency of the decision-making so eroded it necessitated total reconstruction. Whilst this bill is of a highly technical nature, the broader reform package reconstructing the politicised and derelict AAT as the art will have tangible benefits for many constituents of mine. The new art will be fair and just. It will resolve applications in a timely manner. It will be accessible, transparent and restore trust and confidence. Improving the practical functionings of the art will assist hundreds of constituents who seek administrative review of government decisions across a broad range of areas. From decisions relating to social security, the NDIS, aged care, immigration appeals, the new art will assist applicants to reach conclusion more efficiently and will be easier to navigate. I would like to commend the bill to the House.
Thank you. I call the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Administrative Review Tribunal Miscellaneous Measures Bill 2024 supports the establishment of the new Administrative Review Tribunal created by the Administrative Review Tribunal Act 2024, the ART Act. As I said in my second reading speech, this bill updates references to the AAT in legislation that has been introduced into Parliament or has been passed since the main package of legislation was introduced. Other minor and technical amendments ensure that the ART legislation operates as intended. The bill is necessary and could only be introduced following the passage of the ART Act due to the volume and complexity of interactions between the ART Act and other pieces of Commonwealth legislation, particularly those already before the Parliament when the ART package was introduced. The bill makes minor changes to the ART Act to improve user experience and ensure the Act is clear. These changes will remove ambiguity and reduce the need for users of the ART to refer to transitional provisions to identify the application of the Act. The bill amends the ART Act to ensure that amendments to the AAT Act in legislation introduced and passed after the ART legislative package was introduced are given effect. This could not be done before the ART Act was passed. The opposition says that the amendments in this bill require extensive scrutiny. What that means, or would mean, is yet more delay. They want to delay this bill like they tried to delay the ART bill in a misguided effort to protect their stack. In doing so, they will deny ART users, who include veterans, people with a disability and refugees, clarity and simplicity in tribunal processes. This bill completes the package of reforms that establishes the new Administrative Review Tribunal. The bill reflects the ongoing commitment of the Albanese Labor government to reforming Australia's system of administrative review. It simplifies the process for applicants and promotes a more efficient, accessible and cohesive tribunal. I look forward to the first sitting of the new tribunal on the 14th of October this year. I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the clerk. Put the question. All of that opinion say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. I call the clerk. What are you saying? The ayes have it. And I call the clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to deal with miscellaneous and consequential matters arising from the enactment of the Administrative Review Tribunal Act 2024 and for other purposes.
If no member wishes to consider the bill in detail, I will put the question immediately. The question is that this bill be reported to the House without amendment. All those opinions say aye. Aye. No, the ayes have it. Clerk. Oh, sorry.
Next order of the day, Family Law Amendment Bill 2024, resumption of debate on second reading.
And I call the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. All of us in this place acknowledge that, tragically, Australia is suffering from an epidemic of family and gendered violence. Indeed, the authors of the Rapid Review of Prevention Approaches report describe the situation as, and I quote, more than a national crisis. they labelled it a national emergency. The full title of the report is Unlocking the Prevention Potential, Accelerating Action to End Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence. It was commissioned by the Albanese Labor Government in the context of horrific weekly headlines about gendered violence and highlights 21 substantial recommendations. The amendments in this bill are in line with the recommendation number 16 of the rapid review, which states the Commonwealth Government should build on work that is already underway and prioritise systems where significant harm is occurring, such as family law, child support, immigration and taxation. So this emphasised how the Attorney-General characterised the family law system, that it is complex and confusing, it fails to respond effectively to family violence. I'm sure the person who wrote those words would agree with that. The Family Law Amendment 2024 bill is a continuation of the Albanese Labor Government's action on critical family law reforms. The overarching goal is to reform the family law system so that it is simpler to use, safer, more accessible and delivers justice and equity for Australian families. The Family Law Amendment 2023 focused on clarifying the needlessly confusing framework in the Family Law Act for making decisions about parenting arrangements, including the presumption of equal shared parental responsibility. The legislation made it clear that the priority in all decision-making must be in the best interests of the children, something that I fought for a long time while in opposition. Now, amongst other reforms, the 2024 bill focuses on recognising the economic impact of family violence on a party, directly addressing concerns made in the rapid review. Currently, family law property settlement is primarily decided based on the contributions of each party to the relationship, as well as the future needs of each party. In most cases, up until now, the conduct of the parties is not considered to be relevant to the division of property. But the Deputy Speaker, the devil was in the detail, and the devil often sabotaged the details. These reforms underpin the Albanese Labor Government's commitment to addressing the economic consequences of family violence on separated families. Statistically, women are the victims of family violence at much higher rates than men, and First Nations women are disproportionately represented in this group. The 2017 Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs inquiry stressed how relationship breakdown is well recognised as a contributing cause of poverty in Australia, and a lack of equitable access to financial assets can be a major barrier to the recovery of families affected by violence. The report, titled A Better Family Law System to Support and Protect Those Affected by Family Violence, also stated that 7 in 10 women who left a violent relationship had to leave property or assets behind. Furthermore, the inquiry found that when assets are divided, those who have experienced family violence are more likely to accept unfair property settlements. Victims of violence are 3 times more likely to receive less than 40% of the property. Deputy Speaker, there have been more than 24 inquiries in the past decade into the family law system, including other parliamentary inquiries that I was on, that handed down a report in December 2021 called Improvements in Family Law Proceedings, chaired by the former MP Kevin Andrews, and also an important inquiry report delivered by the Australian Law Reform Commission in 2019. It has long been recognised that improvements to the family law system are required to better support participants through the process and in informing the end judgment. They also identified overly complex and confusing legislation and long drawn-out and harmful litigation processes, up to the 42 steps, I seem to recall, 42 steps in the process that a judge would have to consider. So this bill addresses some of these issues. It clarifies the framework used by the courts and separated couples negotiating their own settlement to make decisions on property and financial disputes. The new legislation codifies the steps to be taken in reaching a property settlement. The law must be clear and understandable for all. A fair property settlement can be a big part of avoiding poverty following family violence. Importantly, this legislation recognises that there may be an economic impact of family violence on a party. It therefore expressly allows the courts to consider this effect on a party's contributions to the property of the relationship and their future needs. It also enables the effect of family violence to be considered as part of a spousal maintenance application. The amendments further recognise that the parental requirement to provide appropriate housing for children may be relevant in property and spousal maintenance decisions. Children who have been impacted by family violence may suffer from trauma, and this can be compounded by housing instability and financial insecurity after an unfair property settlement. Another aspect of this bill that will substantially help Australian families going through property settlements is the inclusion of pets in the legislation. Currently, pets are treated like any other property, which can lead to confusion and anxiety for separating couples and their children. In cases of family violence and separation, it is sadly not unusual for the beloved family pet to become a pawn that is used in the continuation of abuse. This bill seeks to alleviate this distress by enabling courts to apply particular consideration to pets to help ensure that they are not used as ongoing weapons in family violence. The courts will be able to decide the ownership of the pet as part of the property settlement. Matters taken into consideration include the extent to which each party has cared for the pet, any history of cruelty to the pet by a particular party, and, if applicable, a child or children's relationship with the pet. These measures reflect the nature of the special relationships that people can have with their pets. Some perpetrators of family violence use the family law system to continue exerting control or abusing their ex-partners. This bill gives the courts greater powers to protect parties and innocent children from the effect of long and antagonistic legal proceedings. It also provides for confidentiality with parties' counselling and medical records. This will stop records being viewed by the other party or used as evidence where the harm in doing so outweighs the need for evidence. This is a significant step to reduce harm to survivors and victims of family violence. Simultaneously, the legislation requires that some disclosure obligations are elevated from court rules into the Family Law Act. This prompts parties to share all relevant financial information, particularly supporting separated couples who are negotiating their own settlement. A further amendment to the Act is to provide a regulatory framework for children's contact services. This will ensure additional safety, reassurance and predictability for families post-separation. It will help children whose families are having difficulty managing their parental contact arrangements, a source of much conflict. This bill also includes a raft of amendments that further clarify and simplify the Family Law Act. The first of these is the clarification of the arbitration framework, consolidating issues that can be arbitrated and giving arbitrators the power to apply to the family law courts for procedural directions. There will also be increased certainty about the costs in family law matters and how these apply to independent children's lawyers. And the bill will permit the court to decide sole applications for divorce where there are children under the age of 18 without having both parties attend. This will significantly reduce legal costs and stress for families. It promotes the timely resolution of parenting disputes through a range of administrative improvements and also clarifies Commonwealth Information Order provisions regarding timely and accurate information about the location of a child. Importantly, it widens the safety net around children by expanding the category of family member and persons about which information of actual or threatened violence must be provided. Deputy Speaker, as you can see, this bill responds to the calls from advocates working in the gendered and family violence space for the system to be more responsive to the victims of family violence. The amendments in this bill are positive. They will provide greater consistency in the court's approach. They acknowledge the impact of family violence on the wealth and welfare of Australian families. Crucially, they indicate how a property settlement between a separated couple should be adjusted to reflect the hardship of family violence, therefore providing economic equality. The bill includes a provision for the statutory review of the reforms 3 years after these amendments start. This reflects the prioritisation of family violence matters and the willingness to adopt different approaches in increasing the safety of families and the fair resolution of family law matters. Finally, these reforms send a message to the victims and survivors of family and domestic violence that the law advocates for them and wants fairer outcomes from legal processes. And I wholeheartedly commend the bill to the House.
I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Family violence isn't something that happens to other families in other suburbs. In my electorate of Goldstein, more than half of the daily police caseload is responding to family and domestic violence. This kind of abuse, whether it's physical, psychological or financial, doesn't discriminate by postcode. It is everywhere. We know that women are most likely to experience physical and sexual violence in the home at the hands of a current male partner or ex-partner. The offender is much more likely to be in the home than to be some mythical monster lurking in the shadows. We also know that family violence often doesn't end when a relationship ends, and there is a documented heightened risk that perpetrators will increase or escalate abusive behaviour against victim survivors during and after separation. In the 2022-23 financial year, 83% of initiating applications for parenting or parenting and property-related orders filed in the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia contained allegations of family violence in the mandatory notice of risk form. We also know that those affected by family violence may struggle to achieve a fair division of property under the Family Law Act and can suffer long-term financial disadvantage. This was in the 2019 Australian Law Reform Commission inquiry report that sat on the shelf and gathered dust during the previous government's term. Family violence can also act as a barrier to women seeking access to justice, providing a disincentive to many women to pursue financial settlement after a relationship breakdown, causing further financial disadvantage for women. So what does this actually mean in practice? It means women stay in violent relationships due to fear of poverty. It means that many that do leave struggle financially for the rest of their lives. It means that children suffer, and it means that the legal system, rather than being a way out, is often weaponised against those trying to escape a life of home-based terror, because that is what it can be, day in, day out. The family violence prevention sector has known for a long time just how prevalent and destructive family violence is in Australian society. It's told us how the tentacles of this threatening, coercive and abusive behaviour can stretch into the legal system after separation. Finally, lawmakers here in this place are catching up. The Family Law Amendment Bill 2024 goes a long way to bringing the Family Law Act up to speed with the reality of Australian society and women's lives. Women who access women's legal services often say they're fearful of seeking the property they're entitled to post-separation due to possible repercussions, including escalating violence, and this means they don't have the financial resources to appropriately care for themselves or their children, or recover from the violence. Women and children should be able to live free of violence always. The safety of women and children should be at the centre of all legal practice and decision-making. Currently, it's not, because the Family Law Act doesn't identify family violence as a relevant matter for the court to consider in a property settlement. The Family Law Amendment Bill addresses this omission. It makes amendments to explicitly allow the court to consider the effect of family violence on the victim survivor's ability to contribute to the property pool of a relationship and to consider the effect of family violence on their future needs. These are important changes because we know that family violence often has a significant impact on the economic well-being, housing security and health of victim survivors, which is exacerbated by the unjust distribution of property. Under these new changes, the effect of family violence can also be considered by the court in determining an application for spousal maintenance. The bill will also introduce a duty of disclosure for property and financial matters into the Family Law Act. The Australian Law Reform Commission recommended that the duty to disclose be codified into the Act to support the transparent disclosure of separating couples' financial circumstances to help the early resolution of disputes. Court proceedings can be weaponised by perpetrators to prolong the dispute and continue the abuse. It's only recently that legal systems abuse has come to our attention as a form of domestic and family violence. Research studies undertaken across Australia, New Zealand and the UK all demonstrate how family law proceedings are deliberately used by perpetrators to assert continued control and intimidation over their children, their child's other parent and anyone else who cares for that child. The duty to disclose will go some way to preventing legal systems abuse. The bill also makes the family law system safer by including amendments to enhance the operation of children's contact services. We should never lose sight of the fact that children are victims in their own right, and every effort should be made to make the changeover of children as safe and trauma-free as possible. There are a range of positive changes to the Family Law Act which will lead to better outcomes for victim survivors, as I've described. However, the provisions in relation to protected confidences, I would argue, don't go far enough to ensure safer outcomes for victim survivors. In the new legislation, the courts will have the ability to prevent private records from health and specialist domestic, family and sexual assault violence services from being viewed by the other party or used as evidence, where the harm in doing so outweighs the need for the evidence. It'll be up to the court to give the direction on its own initiative or on application by the protected confider, who is the woman most of the time. Putting this framework in place is an improvement on the current situation where it's open slather and subpoenas are being overused and misused to present confidential records. But it puts the onus on the protected confider to make an application to prevent disclosure of their records. My view, after extensive expert advice from the women's legal sector, is the onus should be on the person seeking to admit the evidence and not the protected confider to seek leave to have a record of this type admitted in evidence. And if the evidence is admitted, victim survivors should be able to consent to the release of their protected confidences, including access to legal advice prior to giving consent, and that consent being provided in writing. This decision to place the onus on the protected confider was made in response to concerns from some in the legal fraternity that seeking leave before issuing a subpoena would delay matters, increase costs for parties and take up court resources. I have concerns that this approach, taken to mitigate cost and delay, will mean that victim survivors will continue to be harmed. I'm not convinced that's an appropriate trade-off, and neither are women's legal services, who work with women in these situations every single day. It's likely that in many situations, women will be simply unaware of their responsibility to make an application to prevent disclosure of confidential information, or won't have the ability to make an application due to limited access to free legal advice and representation. There should be a presumption that protected confidences are harmful if used in evidence, and the onus should be on the person seeking to admit the evidence to show otherwise in each instance. In other words, the burden should be flipped. Family, domestic and sexual violence is a deeply entrenched societal problem. We know that women often can't leave violent relationships because of the economic impacts. We know that women are often forced to choose between violence or poverty. Making family violence a specific consideration in property disputes is an important step towards creating a family law system that better supports victim survivors of family violence to leave violent relationships and to recover safely with their children. It is critical that alongside any legislative changes, the family law system is properly resourced, including legal assistance services. The federal government must urgently commit to increased, stable, long-term funding for women's legal services to assist women engaged in the family law system, particularly victim survivors of family violence. Women's legal services are on the front line, helping women engage in the family law system. They have unique insights into the impact of the family law system on women experiencing family violence. Indeed, working in such a service carries its own trauma, not only bearing witness to the traumatic experiences of women and children daily, but so frequently being unable to help them due to lack of capacity. In 2023, Women's Legal Services Australia collected national turnaway data over a 5-day period across all 13 women's legal services. It found that 1,018 women who attempted to seek help missed out on getting assistance. From this, we can estimate that more than 1,000 women per week and more than 52,000 women per year will have to be turned away from these services across Australia. And this is representative only of the women who seek assistance. The true extent of unmet legal need related to gender-based violence has yet to be measured. Without additional long-term funding, women's legal services will continue to turn away tens of thousands of women and children at risk of violence every year. A strong and sustainable women's legal sector is vital if we're to end violence against women and children in a generation, as the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children sets out to do. I'm aware of a recent government injection of funding in this area, but in addition, I'm calling for investment into women's legal services to fully meet domestic and family violence demand. This must accompany the changes to the Family Law Act and to give them full effect. I commend this bill to the House.
I call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on the Family Law Amendment Bill 2024. Bills on the Albanese government's landmark reforms in the Australian family law system, which were passed in 2023. Together, these important reforms demonstrate the government's ongoing commitment to ensure the Australian family law system is safer, more accessible and simpler to use, delivers justice and equity for Australian families. Recent inquiries include the 2019 Australian Law Reform Commission inquiry and the 2021 Parliamentary Joint Select Committee inquiry, and they have highlighted ongoing challenges in the family law system, complex and confusing, and fails to respond effectively to family violence. This bill makes a range of amendments to the Family Law Act 1975 to address recommendations from these recent family law inquiries. The bills on the family law reforms which came into effect on the 6th of May this year. The Family Law Amendment Act 2023 and Family Law Amendment Information Sharing Act 2023 established new information sharing arrangements to protect against family safety risk and put the best interests of children at the centre of all parenting decisions in family law matters. Where these reforms from last year focused principally on safety and clarity in parenting orders, children's issues, the key amendments in this bill resolving property and financial aspects of relationship breakdowns. Importantly, the bill before the Chamber today implements improvements in the legal frameworks underpinning property settlements and spousal maintenance matters, including specifically recognising the economic impact of family violence on wealth and welfare of Australian families. The bill makes this family law system safer and simpler. It talks about enhancing the operation of the children's contact services, clarifying important aspects of family law, safeguarding sensitive information in family law proceedings, including specific factors for decisions about family pets, and supporting the effective operation of the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia. Shockingly, and yet unsurprisingly, family violence is present in 80% of parenting matters before the family courts. This new legislation will ensure family and domestic violence can be taken into consideration in property settlements for separating families. It seeks to make division of property and finances safer and simpler and fairer. The law builds on the government's previous reforms. The Act before the Chamber will implement significant reforms. The family law system has been the subject of more than 24 inquiries in the last decade. They've raised consistent issues, including a lack of responsiveness to family violence, an overtly complex and confusing legislation, a barrier to vulnerable users to access or apply the law. The research indicates those affected by family violence struggle to achieve a fair division of property and finances after relationship breakdown and suffer long-term financial disadvantage. And certainly that has been my experience. I practiced in this jurisdiction for close to 25 years and was an accredited specialist in family law from 1996. And it's been my observation that people without resources and people who don't understand the way the law applies are at significant financial disadvantage, particularly as violence can persist not during the course of a relationship but ongoing through the course of the negotiations and the system and trial itself. So the bill seeks to make a division of property and finances safer and simpler. Now, currently, the courts have the power to make just and equitable orders in relation to marital relationships under Section 79 subsection 4 and Section 75(2). Section 79 subsection 4 talks about financial and non-financial contributions to property, and subsection after that talks about contributions to the welfare of the family, including contribution as a homemaker and parent. That is mirrored, by the way, in relation to de facto relationships. We can find that in Section 90SM and 90SF of the Family Law Act. So negative contributions have always been taken into consideration. There's a whole range of case law in this matter. And to give you a couple of illustrations of where it can be taken into consideration, if, for example, one party deliberately destroyed property, or one party deliberately gambled away assets, or deliberately engaged in intentional or reckless behaviour, courts have always been in a position where they can take that into consideration in terms of a dissipation or a negative contribution to the size of the matrimonial pool of assets. But we have never been able to take into consideration the economic impact or consequence of that pool of assets from domestic and family violence perpetrated by one party to the relationship upon the other. That has never been the law. And so this particular legislation is landmark reform. It's absolutely crucial. It's important that we pass legislation like this because we want to ensure that there is justice and equity in relation to people's property settlement. And you've got to take into consideration the real-life impact. The perpetrator of domestic and family violence, if they also are financially better off and have greater resources and qualifications, are often much better off in terms of the outcome of the property settlement. The victim survivor of domestic and family violence is often in a position where they are out of the workforce. They sometimes, and tragically too often, are actually being physically injured as a result of what's gone on, and they cannot work, or their ability to work is inhibited. These factors should be taken into consideration when it comes to property settlement. And for the very first time, we are going to be doing that in terms of property settlement and spousal maintenance proceedings. So these are very, very important impacts in terms of property settlement. When you're considering up to 80% of children-related issues engage in domestic and family violence, just imagine the impact on the outcome of alterations of property settlement that's going to be made by this legislation or available to victim survivors to bring that information on affidavit before a final hearing, or indeed an interim hearing when it comes to spousal maintenance, or interim hearing if it's important to protect property before the final hearing. There's other issues that I think are really important. Disclosure is a big factor in family law matters, as is the case in a lot of civil and criminal litigation. It's important that we have disclosure obligations. And one of the things that I found as a practising lawyer was that people often didn't take it seriously enough. When you've got a situation where up to 40% of people in this jurisdiction are self-represented, they don't take it seriously enough more often than not. And I've been in a situation where people disclose massive amounts of information on the eve of a final hearing. So it's important to have disclosure information, not just simply as a practice direction, but elevated to the point of the Family Law Act. So they realise they're actually breaching the Act when they fail to disclose information that's critical to the outcome of property settlements. It's a fundamental issue of justice. The fundamental importance of disclosure of relevant financial information is about fair and timely resolution of property settlement. The more information that's available to people earlier, the more likely it is they'll settle the case and less likely to go to a final hearing. So it costs less money, it's better for their family, better for their children, better for the outcome in the future. So this amendment is really, really important. It recognises that non-disclosure can have an economic or financial abuse and misuse of systems and processes impact. So this is a critical change that we're making. It's a sensible move. The bill will expand the court's ability to use less adversarial approaches in all types of proceedings, not just for children's matters, but supporting parties to raise safely, I might add safely, family violence risk and ensure safe conduct of proceedings. The other thing that is mentioned here, and we know this too well, and I experienced it, it's quite astonishing. It used to really frustrate me from time to time. You get a situation where the matter was almost always resolved, out of court. You're in the court, usually in Brisbane, and here I was negotiating a property settlement, back and forth. Sometimes it took days to do it, and you get to a point right at the end, and often it was some chattels that were being argued about, but you would not believe the number of times that a dog or a cat, a pet, came up as part of the overall negotiation of property settlement. And the love and affection that Australians have for their animals, that their domestic pets, and the way in which perpetrators of domestic and family violence can use that process to continue the impact of domestic and family violence on the victim survivor. I saw it again and again. So the reform here allows changes here that will assist to reduce that impact. So the bill allows the court to consider a range of factors, including family violence, when determining the ownership of pets in settlements. And this recognises recent research by the Australian Institute of Family Studies, highlighting how pets have been used in coercive and controlling relationships. Astonishing that the number of people that in relationships and post-relationships want to continue that coercive and controlling relationships by use of not just children, but pets as well. So in addition, the bill will provide and support for safe and supervision and changeover of children by establishing a framework for the future regulation of children's contact services. How important that is. How important that is. The changeover is a flashpoint between parties that argue with each other over children. It's an opportunity for domestic and family violence to take place. And it's an opportunity, can I just say, for children to witness the ongoing domestic and family violence of their parents. So this is a critical change that we're making here. These services must operate to a very high standard by professionals, and not just someone who says, I can do the job, and provide essential support to vulnerable and high-risk families to safely manage contact arrangements who can't do it on their own. They too often they'll say they'll change over at McDonald's or something like that. And that's somehow that being in public will prevent harsh words being used, or threats being made, or intimidation, harassment, and the likelihood of occurring again. And that sort of coercive control and harassment and threats can continue. Importantly, the bill will provide the court with greater powers to ensure family law proceedings progress efficiently and allow divorce proceedings to be heard in the absence of parties, and allow the court to not accept a parenting matter if a party has not met the required pre-filing of family dispute resolution requirements. I think that's important. I think that's a significant reform, and I haven't got time to go through it, but I think that's a very important reform. I think that will have some significant impact on how people think about their relationships and their children and their relationships with each other. The bill clarifies and strengthens the Commonwealth Information Order provisions and allow the court to have more information available to assist in the location of a child, including by expanding categories of family members about which family violence information can be sought from Commonwealth Department of agencies. So new power to exclude and prevent disclosure of failure to disclose information. It is so critical, the changes we're making in this space. Deputy Speaker, I just want to finish on this note. If you've practiced in this jurisdiction, and there are many lawyers who do, and many people who come in contact with the system, you know how frustrating it can be. You know how difficult it is to understand practice directions and the Family Law Act and the various sections. Just think about how that impacts on people's thinking and their understanding of where they're going to go, how they're going to resolve their children's issues, how they're going to resolve their property settlement. If we can make it safer, if we can make it easier to understand, if we can make sure their children are safe, if they can understand that they can survive, they can get the help they need, they can get access to professionals, they can get a property settlement that understands the impact of domestic and family violence on them as a victim survivor, that will result in a better country and a better community in which those people can live. So sometimes we debate legislation in this chamber and down just in the main chamber, and it doesn't have much impact on people's lives. But legislation like this completes the family law changes that we've been introducing, and it will make a massive impact on the lives of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Australians in the future. The ability of the court system to render justice and equity is critical to people's respect for the law, but it's also important for people's understanding about how they will get on with their lives, and their expectation of justice can be met by this legislation.
Can I call the member for Warringah?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's always incredibly difficult to deal with family breakdown and separation. And it's sadly a fact of life that currently about 40% of marriages and relationships end in divorce and separation. Many of these separations are amicable and done without conflict, and they're the ones we don't hear about. Unfortunately, where there is breakdown and it's adversarial, there are those who need to rely on the family law system to settle their divorce or separation, divide up property and assets, and decide custody of children. And sadly, all too often, domestic and family violence is a part of that process and a part of those marriage and relationship breakdowns. Before I entered Parliament, I was a family law barrister, and I sadly had the opportunity to observe all too often how much domestic and family violence was a part of those situations. I know how distressing this area of law can be for those that have to engage with it. It's frustrating, it's just incredibly confronting. Because the family unit, your personal situation goes to the core of people's lives, how and where we live, how we raise our children. And often, actually, the family law system is one of the first point of contact people have with the justice system. Many people won't have had any engagement with court processes until that breakdown of family unit and not being able to resolve the dispute. And the process of engaging with family law can be adversarial, confrontational, emotionally unsettling, financially crippling, life-changing, abusive. It can be a continuation of the abuse that's all too often experienced maybe in relationships as well. Now, as a member for Warringah representing my community, unfortunately I still deal with many families, and unfortunately too often women, who still find the system not working in an equitable way and incredibly frustrating. And I do commend the government and the Attorney-General for this legislation. It is a step in the right direction in starting to assist. I will take the opportunity to raise that there are still many who raise with me the concerns under the Hague Convention proceedings, that they don't always mirror or reflect the kind of progress we're making in the family law system. And that is an area I'd urge the government and the Attorney-General to make representations on behalf of Australia to ensure domestic violence and safety is better reflected in the Hague Convention proceedings as well. But on the family law front, after many inquiries and reports from this place, as well as the Australian Law Reform Commission, we have started to make real headway in reforming the system, and I absolutely welcome that. This legislation builds on recommendations made by the Joint Select Committee on Australia's Family Law System, of which I was a member. And it's obvious to so many of us who have dealt with the family law system that consideration of family and domestic violence needs to be and is finally going to be a consideration when it comes to property settlements and other areas. And it really should have been a consideration much before now. We know we have a domestic and family violence epidemic in this country. It's a crisis. I've spoken about it in many opportunities. And I think this opportunity, like others, is a good time to remind us. 64 women were killed by domestic violence in Australia in 2023. We note that number is horrendous for 2024. And according to Destroy the Joint, 47 women have already allegedly been killed by domestic and family violence so far in 2024. And we know that the time at which women are most at risk is in the breakdown of the relationship, the leaving of a relationship. And that's why the right kind of protection and access to services is so incredibly important. It's also making sure that the system works so that they don't return to dangerous relationships. So making law changes to make sure that those who suffer from violence don't see living safely and separately as insurmountable. And that's why changes to the family law system is so incredibly important, that they feel there is a system that will better recognise and reflect and deal with their circumstances and situation. So I know the government has consulted with stakeholders in drafting this legislation, including allowing comment on an exposure draft. But I should say it's disappointing that for many of us in the Parliament, and in particular on the crossbench, we have had fairly limited time in reviewing this legislation, which makes it difficult to fully interrogate the bill and get full feedback from, I think, interested parties and Law Society and others. So I suspect that the bill may well go to inquiry in the other place, which I would welcome, because there hasn't been that opportunity to interrogate it and look to potentially amendments in certain areas. But I absolutely acknowledge that the Attorney-General has been focused on implementing long overdue reform in this area, and in particular the myriad of recommendations that we have had sitting on the shelf for much, much too long. Now, it's a complex area of law, it's very technical, but there has been a wide range of support for these changes. The Women's Legal Services Australia rightly noted in their submission to the exposure draft that reform to the Family Law Act can significantly enhance women's economic well-being by ensuring that family violence is a factor taken into consideration in property settlements, both the impact on contributions to the asset pool and the current and future needs of victim survivors. I strongly agree with this. At the core of this bill, it will allow magistrates and judges to consider the risk of violence and the economic impact of violence when it comes to dividing up property and finances. It was always such an incredibly frustrating situation as a barrister working in this area, that if a client came to me with a tale that clearly involved domestic violence incidents, that clearly impacted their capacity to work, to pursue further education, to better their situation, impacted their liberty, coercive control, impacted their access and freedoms. But under the Kennan principle, you simply couldn't establish that as a means to show how much that impacted a party's financial contribution to the marriage, which ultimately was what the court would take into account in dividing up the assets. And for so many clients, it was incredibly heartbreaking, because they would they still requested I run the argument in relation to the domestic and family violence, because for them it was very important to have it on the record and acknowledged, and it was often very important to have the judges actually acknowledge and accept the evidence in respect to domestic violence, but unfortunately have to acknowledge that there wasn't the threshold from Kennan wasn't met to show that it had a substantial impact on capacity to contribute financially. I mean, you essentially had to show someone was in hospital and couldn't attend their job to show that there was that impact on property proceedings. So I very much welcome that we now have in legislation the clear requirement for the court to consider the impact of domestic violence when it comes to dividing up property and finances, because it has a real impact on victims' financial circumstances. I also really welcome the consideration in the legislation to make allowance for housing needs in relation, and in particular in terms of which party has the care of a child. Because all too often, especially when domestic violence is involved, we see the victims and the children often have to leave the family home, and they then find themselves in a housing crisis. And we know we will never have enough crisis accommodation to assist victims of domestic violence. So we need to tilt the onus, change the situation where there is more I think, pressure on the courts to consider that divvying up of assets and the housing needs of those with the care of children more fully, especially if domestic violence has been there. And I've talked with the Attorney General around even reversing the presumption in relation to a right to occupy the family home, especially pending a resolution of proceedings, which sadly all too often takes several years and often leads to, I guess, systems-induced poverty on victims. This legislation also brings in changes when it comes to protective, sensitive information, and I think this bill strikes a fair balance. I'm satisfied that what's being proposed will give an additional ground of objection to a participant, the maker of protected confidence or the judge. So it's important that when a party to proceedings, for example, issues a subpoena in relation to documents, for example, counselling records, a party will always have the grounds to object to the documents being sought for discovery, and now the changes in the legislation means there's an additional ground on which to object to that production. And I think that's really important, and also that is open for a judge to exercise that, and or the person making the protected confidence, or person with a case guardian, for example. So I think these are all positives, and I'm satisfied that they're good changes. Of course, we can always go further, and I urge the Attorney General to consider continuing to reform this sector, because it really does go to the core of so many families. In terms of the changes to the children's contact services and how they operate, again, this bill introduces much needed regulation of the sector, and I strongly support it. The reality in parenting cases is when there are any risks of harm to the child, you have to have involvement of supervision and children's contact services. It means that often for a period of up to 2 years, contact with the child between one or both parents will be really limited, and in particular if there isn't access to children's contact services. And so an area I would urge the Attorney General to focus on is making sure there's equitable access to contact services, because I know regional communities do not have sufficient contact services. And if you can't get in, or there's a long wait list, the reality is contact ceases between a parent and a child, and that has a huge impact on that relationship. And that's often before you've had a full, I guess, working out of the allegations by a court. And so it's really important that there is equitable access pending determination of proceedings, so that you don't have irreparable damage made to relationships between parent and children, but that relationship can continue in a safe and supervised environment. That is absolutely vital. And of course, the standards vary a lot, so I think it's really important to have that now that regulated. Now, obviously, apart from the time limit, I feel that there's been in relation, I feel there's a key area for improvement outside of this bill is funding the community legal sector. Now, I've spoken many times about the need for changes, I think, to sentencing and to have a much greater deterrent when it comes to the consequences of domestic and family violence to protect women and children. But pending changes to our laws, and I acknowledge that with our federated system it means changes to state laws in terms of sentencing, we need to make sure people can access the law and can access advice, and that is where it's so vital that we have funding for frontline legal services, Indigenous services, especially in regional communities. At the moment we know they are so pressed for resources, they have to pick and choose which courts they may or may not be able to offer services at, which means a huge cohort go unassisted. Now, I went through my law degree, I passed my bar exams. It is complex and it is hard. To expect people unassisted, unaided, unadvised to deal with the system is just, it's just not, it leads to really bad outcomes. People misunderstand the law, they don't understand the requirements or the presumptions, and you end up with really bad outcomes, and I think dangerous outcomes. So very much urge the Attorney General to continue focusing on that aspect. I know stakeholders like the Law Council of Australia, and have noted that the exposure draft and the current draft of the bill may create unintended consequences of further litigation, so there is some concerns there. So clarifying and simplifying areas of law in this bill may in fact complicate it, and so that's where that inquiry process in the other place I think will be beneficial. Community legal sector is facing chronic underfunding, as I said, and so if we want them to be able to assist participants in the family law system, they need to be funded. It's just a basic aspect for this to work. And so I urge the government to step up in its funding through the National Access to Justice Partnership. We need accountability and transparency for how those funds are being spent and dispersed. I know there's been a recent announcement, I think last week, of $800 million. It's a start, but I really argue it's only a down payment. More funding, more detail is going to be increased. The concern is also the delay in accessing it, so that the lawyers in this sector can actually have some ongoing contracts and certainty of staying in the system. This is an area that obviously will always require a lot of ongoing work, so I urge the Attorney General to stay focused on this and make sure our regional areas have access to the help, because we know actually domestic and family violence and unfortunately fatalities overwhelmingly occur in the more remote and regional areas, and so we have to make sure they have access to assistance as well.
Call the Attorney and conclude.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Family Law Amendment Bill 2024 contains important reforms to the Family Law Act 1975, which build on landmark reforms for parenting matters that commenced on May the 6th, 2024. The Albanese government is committed to ensuring the family law system is safer, more accessible, simpler to use, and delivers justice and equity for all Australian families. This bill will make resolving property and financial aspects of relationship breakdown safer, simpler and fairer for separating families, especially where family violence is present. We know that those affected by family violence struggle to achieve a fair division of property after a relationship breakdown and suffer long-term financial disadvantage. Family violence may also be a barrier to women seeking a property settlement at all. This bill is an opportunity to send a strong message to the community that property settlement outcomes should recognise the effect of family violence on individuals and on the wealth and welfare of the family where this is relevant. It is an opportunity to provide additional safety, reassurance and predictability for families by providing for the establishment of a regulatory framework for children's contact services to ensure safe and child-focused services for families who cannot safely manage contact arrangements themselves. The bill also seeks to introduce a power for the courts to safeguard protected confidences in family law proceedings and other measures that clarify the operation of aspects of the law and support the efficient administration of the family courts. This bill will better assist Australians using the family law system by creating a safer and clearer process for separating families. I commend the bill to the House.
And I thank the Attorney-General. The question before the Federation Chamber is this bill be now read a second time, and I'll put that question. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber will now consider the bill in detail. Oh, sorry.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend legislation relating to family law and for related purposes.
And I thank the clerk. The Federation Chamber will now consider the bill in detail. I understand it is the wish of the Chamber to take the bill as a whole. The question is that the bill be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I ask leave of the Federation Chamber to move amendments 1 to 3 as circulated in my name together.
Is leave granted?
Leave is granted.
I thank the Attorney-General. The member for Goldstein has the call.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move amendments 1 to 3 as circulated in my name together. My amendments concern protected confidences in family court proceedings and are designed to prevent victim survivors of domestic and family violence from experiencing further harm. And my amendments don't come out of left field. In fact, they almost made it into law. Draft amendments in relation to protected confidences were included in an exposure draft of the Family Law Amendment Bill last year. These amendments would have made documents such as medical and counselling records unable to be admitted in evidence without leave of the court or consent of the protected confider, or in the case of a child, the consent of those who have parental responsibility for the child. This measure placed the onus on the person seeking to admit the evidence, rather than the protected confider, to seek leave to have a record of this type admitted in evidence. My amendments are along the lines of the 2023 exposure draft. They flip the burden so that the default is the evidence is not admissible unless leave is given. My amendments put the onus on the person seeking to admit the evidence or issue a subpoena to seek leave, not the protected confider. This primarily requires changes to section 102BC and 102BD of the bill, and they provide enhanced safeguards to ensure protected confiders are giving specific and informed consent for the evidence to be admitted or documents to be disclosed, inspected or copied. The disclosure of protected confidences can be harmful to victim survivors who are trying to rebuild their lives. That's because information becomes a weapon in the hands of domestic violence perpetrators. Allowing confidential documents in trial processes can provide perpetrators with additional means to cause harm to victims and further disrupt the mother and child relationship. Victim survivors should be able to consent to the release of their protected confidences, provided there are safeguards ensuring this is done with their informed consent, including access to legal advice prior to giving consent, and that consent be provided in writing. With the Family Law Amendment Bill 2024, there's no requirement that a party seek leave before issuing a subpoena, and the onus is now on the protected confider to make an application to prevent disclosure of their records. I note that these changes were made in response to concerns from some in legal circles that the initial exposure draft would delay matters, increase costs for parties and take up court resources. In some cases, information sharing will lead to more timely outcomes. However, an increase in information will not address the root cause of delays, which is often legal systems abuse. These delays are caused by vexatious former partners who prolong litigation to waste the resources of the other party by refusing to sign legal documents and failing to attend meetings or court dates. If the legal profession is serious about cracking down on these delays, it should tackle systems abuse. Another counter view is in some cases these records are important in determining the risk the mother poses and the best interest of the child. But counselling records, Deputy Speaker, aren't the only way to determine this. There are other ways the court can receive information about what's in the child's best interest, including police reports, child protection and both parties' own evidence. Placing the onus on the protected confider means that victim survivors will continue to be harmed. They'll potentially be unaware of their responsibility to even make an application to prevent disclosure of confidential information, or won't have the ability to make an application due to limited access to free legal advice and representation. And we know, due to the lack of capacity in the community legal system, that getting legal assistance is very difficult. And I would note, Deputy Speaker, that these amendments were formulated with the expert assistance of the women's legal sector. This is what the sector wants. The family law system must allow victim parents the best possible opportunity to recover without further incursions on their capacity to care for their children, and I urge the government to consider accepting this amendment. Thank you, Speaker.
And I thank the member for Goldstein. The question is that the amendment be agreed to. I give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I do thank the member for Goldstein for her proposed amendment and for her engagement on these important family law reforms. With respect to the member for Goldstein, the government has formed a different view. The member for Goldstein correctly points out that this was the subject of the exposure draft, but debate generally on this measure shows what a difficult exercise it is in balancing competing interests. In some instances, while disclosure would be distressing, the information that's contained in a party's sensitive therapeutic records will nevertheless be highly relevant to the best interests of a child involved in the proceedings. Just to give an idea of the administrative or procedural scale that we are dealing with, over 61,500 subpoenas were issued in family law proceedings in the last financial year. Many of those subpoenas relate to sensitive therapeutic records. creation of a presumption of inadmissibility could prevent the court from considering critical information relating to a child's safety and best interests in matters where an application for leave is not made. We've had extensive consultation on this, including 2 exposure drafts of legislative provisions. The approach that we've adopted makes an additional safeguard available to protect vulnerable parties from harm where it's appropriate, while prioritising a decision-maker having all the information relevant to the safety and best interests of children at their disposal. Judges will be able to weigh considerations of the potential harm that adducing evidence may cause a person against its probative value in a matter, with the best interests of any children involved as the paramount consideration. The government's view is that this is an appropriate starting point and a step forward to enhance protections against the misuse of evidentiary provisions in family law matters, a risk of which we are acutely aware. The bill includes a statutory review mechanism 3 years after commencement, which will enable consideration of the need for any improvements. In addition, I expect the bill will be referred to a committee in the other place for inquiry, but the government will not be supporting the amendment moved by the member for Goldstein in the House.
I thank the Attorney-General. The question is that the amendments be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Just 2 points of clarification through you to the Minister. Given that in the 22-23 financial year, 83% of applications for parenting or parenting and property-related orders filed in the Federal Circuit and Family Court contained allegations of family violence, why should a further burden be placed on victim survivors to prevent the disclosure of their confidential records? And further to that, given the lack of capacity in the community legal system, how will victim survivors be made aware of this responsibility, given that we know that up to 1,000 a week are currently being turned away from free legal advice?
I give the call to the Attorney-General.
As I've said, this is the fact that we're having this debate is a real demonstration of the difficult exercise in balancing the quite self-evident competing interests here. But the amendment that the member for Goldstein has moved would impose obligations on those issuing subpoenas or seeking to have documents produced to them, which would greatly increase the administrative burden on the court and on parties, which is why we've opted for the setting that appears in the bill that's now before this House. As I've said, there will be an opportunity for further examination in a committee in the other place. There will be an opportunity for review of this in 3 years' time. We've struck the balance where we think is appropriate, and in answer to the question raised by the member for Goldstein as to how parties will be aware, on something like this, the court will make sure that parties are aware. I appreciate there is a problem about not every party in the court receiving legal advice, but the court is already highly sensitive to the problems that can be caused and the intrusion and distress that can be caused by the subpoenaing of therapeutic records. It's a matter on which the court's already fully engaged, and I would expect will continue to be.
I thank the Attorney-General. The question before the Federation Chamber is that the amendments moved by the member for Goldstein be agreed to. So I'll put that question. All those of that opinion say aye. Against say no. No. I think the noes have it. The question now before the House is that this bill be agreed to, and I'll put that question. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Against say no. I think the ayes have it. This bill has been agreed to. The question now is that this bill be reported to the House without amendments, and I'll put that question. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Against say no. I think the ayes have it, and I'll call the clerk.
Government business. Next order of the day, Crimes and Other Legislation Amendment, Omnibus Number 1 Bill 2024, resumption of debate on second reading.
So the question before the Federation Chamber now is that this bill be now read a second time, and I'll give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The role of the Attorney-General is never-ending, and we're fortunate on our side of politics to produce some of the nation's best. Everett and Gareth Evans come to mind, and to that company, I'm sure that we can add the current Attorney General. But the demands of the job are constant. New issues are always emerging, with the result being existing legislation always needs to be updated, tailored, amended and kept up to date. With this in mind, I commend the Attorney General for bringing this legislation before the House today. It updates existing legislation to address the way modern criminals conduct their business, and also includes provisions that will deter them from undertaking similar activities in the future. The bill makes a number of amendments to certain crime-related provisions in several Commonwealth Acts. These acts include the Crimes Act 1914, the Process of Crimes Act 2002, National Anti-Corruption Commission Act 2022, and the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act 1979, the Telecommunications Act 1997, and the Criminal Code 1995. The end result of all these amendments will be that certain legislative provisions administered by the Attorney General will be improved and clarified. Further, that the law enforcement agency's ability to investigate criminal activity relating to the digital currency exchanges will be improved. Schedule 1 of the bill relates to the seizing of digital assets under warrant. The means by which criminals conduct their business is always evolving. The days of hiding behind a large rock with a posse and arms waiting for a stagecoach to pass are long gone. Nowadays, with the advent of the digital economy, criminal activity often includes digital assets and especially cryptocurrency. Criminal activity involving digital access includes the purchase of drugs, child exploitation, material and firearms through the dark web, ransomware, cyber-related offences, money laundering and financing terrorist organisations. It is therefore essential that law enforcement agencies have appropriate tools and mechanisms to address the emerging issues. This bill does that by amending the Crimes Act 1914 and the Process of Crimes Act 2002 to ensure that the powers available to law enforcement to seize digital assets under a warrant reflect the operating environment. In doing so, this amendment will ensure that criminals are deprived of the benefits of their crime and may be deterred from future criminal activity. Schedule 2, Deputy Speaker, refers to extending the current investigative and freezing powers that cover financial institutions to digital currency exchanges. In many respects, this relates to Schedule 1 in the way that criminal activities are undertaken has changed, and as a consequence, the responses from law enforcement also need to change. The bill before us then, through Schedule 2, amends the Process of Crimes Act 2002 to expand the definition of a financial institution to include digital currency exchanges. These amendments will ensure that freezing orders, notices to financial institutions and monitoring orders can be made in relation to accounts held in digital currency exchanges. Again, the aim is clear. By allowing law enforcement to freeze relevant accounts before any restraint action can be undertaken, criminals will be unable to move or dissipate their process to other activities. Schedule 3 amends the Crimes Act 1914 to increase the value of a penalty for Commonwealth offences for $313 to $330. Maintaining the value of the penalty unit is necessary to ensure that penalties for the Commonwealth offences keep pace with community expectations. It is necessary that penalties act as the deterrent they are meant to be. Raising the amount that is charged will ensure the consequence meets the offence. On this matter, I note the last ad hoc increase was January 2022, and in that time the cost of living in Australia has risen by 9.38%. Schedule 4 clarifies the functions of the Communication Access Coordinator in the Attorney General's Department and creates a new Communications Security Coordinator position in the Department of Home Affairs. The latter reform will, as a result, remove a significant administrative burden by removing the Communication Access Coordinator functions currently administered by the Department of Home Affairs into that department. Schedule 5 of the matter before us will expand the ability of the state and territory integrity agencies to share inception information and inception warrant information with oversight bodies. These amendments will apply to the New South Wales ICAC, the New South Wales Inspector of Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, South Australia's Inspector of the ICAC, and the Parliamentary Inspector of Corruption and Crime Commission in Western Australia and the Victorian Inspectorate. The amendments accurately reflect developments occurring in the state and territory oversight and integrity space and enable oversight bodies to properly scrutinise and audit inception activities and compliance with the Telecommunications Inception and Access Act 1979 and fulfil their statutory functions through access to the inception of information and the inception of warrant information. Deputy Speaker, I've spoken in the past about cybercrime and scams. Those intent on criminal and nefarious activities are clever. They're always scheming and planning new ways to do their business. While as individuals we may not be the direct victims of their crime, others are, and our community as a whole therefore loses. The bill before us updates important aspects of our legislative framework for addressing these new types of crime. I commend them to the House.
I thank the member for Werriwa. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Fisher.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the Crimes and Other Legislation Amendment Omnibus No. 1 Bill 2024. Sometimes we debate enormous, transformational and historic pieces of legislation in this place. They top the news headlines for days, weeks and sometimes months. They define elections and determine the future of our nation. Other times, the changes we debate are small but necessary changes. They clean up ambiguities, clarify grey areas and address those, shall we say, small things which create legal nightmares when the rubber hits the road. This bill is one of those latter examples. Simply put, we're introducing minor changes to ensure that our law enforcement agencies have the tools they need to keep pace with the fast-evolving world of digital crime. We need to ensure that there is no room for confusion or misinterpretation in the law. It also allows us to better maintain the integrity of our telecommunication systems. Mr Deputy Speaker, criminals are constantly finding new ways to exploit loopholes in the law, and the rapid advance of technology means that the slow-moving beast of Australian legislation is lagging behind. Law enforcement agencies have identified an increase in criminals' use of digital assets, including cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies, to facilitate their offending. We're talking about drug trafficking, firearm sales and, most heinously, child sexual exploitation. We're talking about money laundering, the financing of terror organisations, ransomware and scams. These technologies are being used in organised crime and some of the most vile kinds of abuses targeting vulnerable Australians. AUSTRAC, or the Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre, is Australia's financial intelligence agency. They are responsible for monitoring financial transactions to identify money laundering, organised crime, tax evasion, welfare fraud and terrorism financing. In their recent report into money laundering in Australia, AUSTRAC said, "Scam methods are constantly evolving. Offenders are becoming increasingly sophisticated in their delivery and execution, and criminal activity can be more difficult to detect and disrupt. Offenders leverage emerging technologies, and it is Australians, their families and their businesses who are paying the price." Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't think a day or at least a week would go by where I don't get approached by someone in my electorate who shares with me their stories. When I was on my tour to Fisher last week, I met a lovely little old lady who was in her 80s, and she had been scammed of her entire life savings. And you know, your heart just breaks, particularly for the older generation, who really, many of them are very, very vulnerable online. And these crooks that make their way through the internet in particular, it just makes my blood boil that so many of these people see particularly older and vulnerable Australians as easy beats. And, you know, we collectively in this place as legislators, we need to make it as difficult, as costly as we possibly can for these crooks. In 2023 alone, Australians made 600,000 reports of scams, with aggregate losses of more than $2.7 billion. Businesses, including small and micro businesses, reported losses of $29.5 million to ScamWatch. In fact, money laundering cost Australians over $60 billion a year, with a global cost of as much as $1 trillion a year. Dr. Dennis Desmond is a lecturer in cybersecurity at Uni SC on the Sunshine Coast. He was a former US FBI agent in the US and has undertaken some important research into the use of blockchain and cryptocurrency in organised crime and terror financing. He said, and I quote, "Despite increased global regulation and enforcement, the use of cryptocurrencies in illicit trade and laundering activities grows each year. A corresponding growth in cybercrime, ransomware, identity fraud and cryptocurrency theft from exchanges feeds the pool of illicit digital proceeds. Recent efforts to reduce crypto laundering activities have been insufficient despite the global implications for terrorism funding and the cost to governments," close quote. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are simply failing to equip our law enforcement agencies with the legislative tools they need to prevent, disrupt and prosecute this kind of unlawful behaviour and organised crime. As Australia's Parliament, we have a responsibility to close these gaps, to protect Australians and to secure their future. Now, in relation to cryptocurrency, firstly let me touch on the amendments to the Crimes Act and the Proceeds of Crimes Act. These changes will allow our police and anti-corruption agencies to more effectively seize digital assets like cryptocurrency when investigating criminal activity. We've all heard stories of criminals using cryptocurrencies to hide and distribute their ill-gotten gains. This isn't science fiction, nor is it a spy novel. It's happening right now in this country. And it's not a niche issue. Crypto has become a frequent tool in criminal transactions. The laws we're debating right now make it crystal clear that when law enforcement agencies execute a search warrant, they have the authority to access and seize digital warrants and cryptocurrencies they hold. And it's not just crypto. Criminals seek to exploit a whole host of legitimate financial channels, assets and services. As a result, it's important that these laws extend to a range of other digital assets that could hold value. The bill in question allows for that kind of flexibility to ensure that the definition of digital assets keeps pace with the growth of emerging technologies. I also want to touch on the amendments to the Telecommunications Act because I think that these changes need to be explained. The amendments are about ensuring the security of our telecommunication systems and improving oversight. The bill clarifies the roles of the Communications Access Coordinator and creates a new position, the Communications Security Coordinator within the Department of Home Affairs. The bill doesn't grant any new functions to this new Communications Security Coordinator. Rather, it transfers certain existing functions performed by the Communications Access Coordinator to align the roles with the new administrative arrangements in the government. Now, I'm the first person to point out that creating a new government position or making government bigger doesn't make Australians safer or our country more secure. But where the public is exposed to investigative and law enforcement powers, I believe it's incumbent upon the Parliament as our chief source of civilian oversight to legislate protections in the public interest. That's why these laws will streamline information sharing processes while ensuring that our critical communications infrastructure remains secure and protected from malicious actors. They allow oversight bodies for state-based integrity agencies to access intercepted information, thereby enabling them to scrutinise and audit the activities of those agencies that they oversee. This is about transparency and ensuring that agencies are using their powers lawfully and responsibly. It's a safeguard for the public, ensuring that those who are entrusted with significant powers are themselves subject to appropriate and proper oversight. Mr Deputy Speaker, these minor changes are a responsible update to the laws that govern important aspects to our justice system. The bill also ensures that those tasked with keeping us safe are prepared for community safety in the modern age. We simply must get better at empowering law enforcement to protect Australians. I think one of those areas which we are seriously lagging behind is in artificial intelligence and machine learning. I've often talked about the use of AI in defence, particularly in light of the AUKUS arrangement. But artificial intelligence poses...
the member for Fisher to resume his seat. It being 6:30 p.m, the debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 192B. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. The member for Fisher will have leave to continue speaking when the debate is resumed on a future day, and I call the clock.
Government business, order of the day number 2, grievance debate.
And I thank the clerk. The question now is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, the new Star Casino opened in Brisbane not even 2 weeks ago and is now asking for a government bailout, asking for billions of dollars to go out the door to prop up the gambling industry. It's a classic case of socialism for the rich, but rugged individualism for everyone else. These giant corporations do not play by the same rules as the rest of us do. When they need help, governments of all persuasions go above and beyond to provide absolutely everything they need to be able to keep their flailing business models going. No one else across the economy gets that level of support. This is an economy that has been created by both major parties over the last few decades. One rule for the multinational corporations and another rule for everyone else. It's a matter of priorities, of choices. What governments do, and often what they don't do, speaks volumes. The actions and inactions of the government help to determine what kind of society we will become. So when we hear stories from Australia and around the world about the necessity of bailing out enormous companies, banks, casinos, and the like, while at the same time poverty increases and homelessness gets worse, it makes sense that people are very angry. These actions make people angry because they always come at a time where everyday people are struggling. People can't afford their rents, their mortgages, the cost of groceries is skyrocketing. We are told that the government is doing everything they can to help people, but there's always got to be a few billion kept aside just in case a multinational company or a billionaire needs a bailout or a nuclear submarine needs buying. Just never enough for public and social services. This is not a way to run an economy or a country unless you want both to end in ruin. Our economy should work for all of us, not just a small few at the top. Our economy should be built on the idea that everyone should have what they need to live a good life. The essentials of healthcare, education and food and housing cannot be left solely in the hands of the market. It is these old ideas that have gotten us into this mess. The same ideas will not get us out. We need to start thinking outside the box. We need to push for new ideas of what is even considered possible. And what is possible for Australia is a society that values human dignity and an economy built on that foundation and of equality of opportunity. But what does that actually look like? Well, it looks like bringing dental and mental health into Medicare, for starters. We are all seeing and experiencing rates of bulk billing slipping away as our healthcare system continues on its slide towards mirroring the United States. We cannot keep going down that path. The best way to protect Medicare is to expand it, to cover our brains and our teeth. Now, this new kind of economy looks like wiping student debt and making uni free again, so that everyone in this country has access to higher education. We can improve our country's productivity and begin to specialise our economy so we are ready for the jobs of the future, where almost 50% of which will need a university degree. It also looks like fixing our broken housing system so that a house is seen as a home, not a speculative market to invest in. It means building public housing, introducing caps on rent increases, and dramatically scaling back negative gearing so that everyone can afford a house of their own. It means 100% publicly owned, renewable energy and a rapid transition to a net zero economy, protecting our environment and our biodiversity at the same time as lowering our emissions and our power bills. But most of all, to achieve any of this, a new kind of economy means taking on the billion-dollar corporations, the fossil fuel companies, the politicians of the major parties, and the billionaire class who are addicted to the status quo. We can make these changes. We can create a society and an economy that finally puts people over profit. And that change is coming, especially as younger people who enter the workforce see just how bleak the future really is. We have to demand and create a better world. All of our futures and the future of our planet depend on us doing so. Now, I also want to talk about the census, not just as an MP whose electorate is home to a large number of queer people, but also as a gay man myself. The last couple of weeks have been extremely rough for the LGBTIQA+ community. Counting us in the census was something the community had been working on and campaigning for years to achieve. To find out that this was not happening after it was dropped to Sky News on a Sunday afternoon was an insult. This Labor Prime Minister truly believed that his government could walk back a promise made to the community in the lead up to the 2022 election and reaffirmed in Labor's 2023 national platform, seemingly without any blowback. And choosing Sky News of all places as the outlet to give this story to said it all for me. It was yet again another example of this government letting their fear of the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, call the shots. But I was so proud to see the community unite and demand the government change its position. And the pressure worked. We first saw the government agree to ask a question on sexual orientation, and then a few days later agree to ask one on gender identity, but the intersex community are still left behind. The Greens will continue to urge and pressure the government to work with the intersex community and the ABS on a path forward so that we can ensure everyone in the LGBTIQA+ community is counted. But the damage has sadly already been done. I've personally heard from numerous queer people in my electorate, from my own friends, and from people across the country that their trust in the Labor Party has been shattered by this. It came at a time when so many people are already struggling with cost of living, with housing, stress, and then the general feeling from people was, you're not even going to give us this. The protections for queer staff and students in schools were given up on, and now we couldn't even have something as simple as being counted in the census. Saying one thing in opposition and doing another thing in government is not how you win friends, and it creates an enormous sense of distrust in the community that can be impossible to recover from. We don't expect much from the coalition on LGBTIQA+ issues, but we and I expected a hell of a lot more from Labor. And the paternalistic language that we heard from the Prime Minister did not make me feel better. I found it condescending. The queer community is not weak. We do not always need to be protected. We can fight for ourselves. We had been campaigning for this census change for years. It was a fight we wanted and we were willing to have. It was the job of a supposed progressive government to have our backs in that fight. But I'm not even angry anymore, and I was very angry. I'm just disappointed. On top of being counted in the census and protections for queer students and teachers in schools, what we need now is an LGBTIQA+ Human Rights Commissioner. Someone working in the Australian Human Rights Commission to ensure that queer rights receive the full attention that they deserve. Right now, across the world, we see the rise of the far right and the demonisation of queer people. We need an LGBTIQA+ Human Rights Commissioner to help us hold the government of this country to account so that even when the major parties show their true colours, there are even more voices calling them out and holding them to account. I've been calling for such a commissioner since I first arrived in this place just a bit over 2 years ago, and the Greens will keep fighting for one. If the Labor Party has any hope of rebuilding trust with the queer community in this country, they should get on board and establish this commissioner.
I thank the member for Brisbane for their contribution. The question before the Federation Chamber is that grievances be noted. I give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to assert the future of the Northern Coastal Growth Corridor within the Pearce electorate. As we know, Pearce is one of the fastest and largest growing electorates in both Western Australia and the nation. The majority of this growth is concentrated in the Northern Coastal Corridor stretching from Battler to Two Rocks, which is undergoing rapid expansion. Currently, this area represents 17% of the Pearce electorate, but by 2041, we expect that figure to surge to 40%. Right now, nearly 40,000 people call this Northern Coastal Corridor home. However, by 2046, that number is projected to exceed 169,000 people, a staggering increase of over 400%. This significant growth is not just a number on a page. It is clear a signal that we need immediate strategic planning, especially in developing community infrastructure focused on recreation, sport, surf and aquatic facilities. Given these projections, the need for an active regional open space facility in the corridor is urgent. Over the next 20 years, we'll require at least 2 more venues, and by 2070, we will need up to 7. Despite the rapid growth in the Alkimos area, there is currently no active regional open space between Tamala Park and Two Rocks. The only active regional open space in our northwest sub-regions are located in Kingsway and Joondalup, which already see over 1.5 million visitors annually, which equates to 4,100 visitors per day. If we do not develop additional facilities soon, that number is likely to soar to 6,300 visitors daily by 2036. Both venues are nearing maximum capacity, and they simply will not be able to accommodate this increase. We must ensure that our community infrastructure evolves alongside our growing population by engaging in long-term planning and project selection. We must look at the bigger picture and prioritise projects that will have the most positive impact on our communities. We also need to integrate housing and infrastructure development. It is essential, as we build new homes, that we also ensure that this is necessary supporting infrastructure such as schools, parks and transport is developed simultaneously. Community engagement is also vital. We must listen to the voices of our residents. By incorporating their feedback into our planning processes, we can ensure that our developments truly reflect the community's needs. Flexibility and adaptability in design are crucial. Infrastructure should be built to accommodate future changes in community needs. Think about multi-purpose facilities that can adapt to different users over time. This way, we can ensure that our infrastructure remains relevant and useful for years to come. Collaboration across all levels of government is essential. By working together, local, state and federal, we can pool our resources and expertise to tackle complex infrastructure challenges more effectively. The Albanese Labor government has been instrumental in driving this transformation. The extension of the railway to Yanchep and the expansion of the freeway to Eglinton are not just infrastructure upgrades, they are vital investments in our region's future. Plus, the Albanese Labor government committed over $50 million to Pearce, and this significant financial support underscores the dedication to fostering growth and development in our rapidly expanding region. These transportation projects and financial commitments are crucial for enhancing connectivity, supporting growth and driving economic impact. Improved transportation infrastructure creates vital links between communities, fostering social interaction and ensuring access to essential services. The Northern Coastal Growth Corridor is home to a growing youthful demographic. This presents a clear need for multi-purpose community centres in emerging suburbs like Alkimos, Eglinton, Yanchep and Two Rocks. These centres will be vibrant hubs of activity, offering a wide range of recreational activities and sports facilities, ensuring accessibility for all residents and fostering a sense of community cohesion. We also need to consider our ageing population. It is imperative to create accessible community spaces tailored to their needs, offering social and meeting spaces near essential services and public transport. Given our extensive shoreline, surf lifesaving clubs are critical. These facilities must be integrated into the coastal environment, providing safety services while enhancing the beach experience for residents and visitors alike. Our goal is to create spaces that are flexible, adaptable and inclusive. that will reflect the diverse needs of our growing population. Last week, we welcomed the Federal Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories, Minister Christine McBain, to Pearce, who saw for herself the growth potential of Pearce. It is important that all levels of government, with community members and local businesses, work together to create a community that is accessible, inclusive and well equipped to handle the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. As we move forward, let us remember that the decisions we make today will shape the future of our communities for generations to come. By planning carefully, investing wisely, and staying true to the needs and values of our residents, we can build a future that we can all be proud of. To ensure that new infrastructure projects are community-driven, it is essential to adopt a comprehensive approach that emphasises engagement, collaboration, and responsiveness to community needs. Effective community engagement starts at the early stages of an infrastructure project. Establishing clear and transparent communication channels with the community is critical. This means informing residents about the project's purpose, potential impacts and benefits right from the very outset. Early engagement helps build trust, manage expectations and involve community members in the decision-making process. Listening to community members and stakeholders is a cornerstone of successful engagement. We know that meetings, focus groups and public consultations provide a platform for individuals to voice their concerns, opinions and ideas. Actively involving stakeholders fosters a sense of ownership and ensures that the project aligns with the community's needs and values. Engaging community organisations, local leaders and not-for-profits as partners as the infrastructure project is essential. Collaborative partnerships bring diverse perspectives, expertise and resources to the table. This approach not only helps in identifying potential challenges, but also in developing innovative solutions that address community concerns. Many infrastructure projects involve technical aspects that may not be easily understood by the general public. It is therefore important to provide educational resources and information in accessible formats that empower community members to participate meaningfully. Presenting project details in clear, non-technical language, utilising visual aids and conducting workshops can help demystify complex projects. Community engagement should not be limited to the planning and construction phases. Establishing mechanisms for ongoing dialogue and feedback throughout the project's life cycle is vital. Regular updates and progress reports should be in place to address concerns and adopt the project as necessary to reflect the evolving needs of the community. Listening and gathering community feedback is critical both during planning and evaluation phases of a project. This feedback allows leaders to better understand community priorities and ensures that the infrastructure developed meets those needs. It also creates a more competitive application for funding, highlighting community support for the project. Community engagement can be enhanced through workforce development initiatives and project planning. By creating local job opportunities and involving community members in the workforce, projects can foster a strong sense of involvement and investment among residents. Facilities should be adaptable to changing community needs and should incorporate green spaces to enhance the environment. This approach not only benefits the community but also promotes a strong sense of connection, pride and ownership among residents. Engaging residents from the outset, listening to their needs and fostering collaboration will lead to better outcomes. Ultimately, this approach not only enhances the effectiveness of infrastructure projects but also provides local jobs, strengthens community ties and builds trust in the planning process. Mr Deputy Speaker, I conclude by saying how very proud I am to be part of the Albanese Labour government who will ensure that they deliver a better future for all Australians, a future made in Australia that builds much more needed community infrastructure and which then creates economic opportunity and does indeed include a thriving community. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Pearce. The question is that grievance has been noted and I give the call to the Member for Casey.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Casey, it's a wonderful community. It's a strong community that has had a history of working together. And like all communities, we face challenges. But we're going to work together to solve those challenges. And I've been so fortunate to work with many in the community to look after some of the needs that we have. And I'm going to talk about those today, starting with roads and transport. And anyone that drives through Casey knows that our roads are suffering from significant neglect and disrepair. Whether it's our suburbs, whether you're heading out to Powtown, like I had the opportunity to do on Saturday night to celebrate the end of season with the Powtown Football Club, or you're up in the Dandenongs, or you're driving the Warburton Highway, or dodging potholes on the Melbourne Highway. So many of our roads pose significant hazards. So it's no surprise that the RACV's My Country Road Survey, most reported roads is the Melbourne Highway between Coldstream and Yea. It's a terrible stretch of road that has suffered neglect from the Victorian State Labor government. And this was closely followed by the Warburton Highway, with the road between Seville and Woorolloc, which is renowned for potholes, dangerous driving, dangerous roads and unsafe intersections. And when I'm out door knocking, talking to my community, one of the biggest issues raised is the poor state of our local road network. And when I'm door knocking, Deputy Speaker, in Mooroolbark or Lilydale or Mount Evelyn, residents are talking to me about the Mooroolbark and Hull Road underpass, the single lane under the train line. The underpass has been a bottleneck since I was a kid, and it's time it was upgraded so our community can get home sooner and safer. And I'll continue fighting to upgrade the underpass, and I thank those in the community that have added their voice to my petition and my campaign to get that upgrade, which is sorely needed, and together we can get that done. Now, my community is peri-urban, so we've got suburban areas, we've got highways, as I talked about, we've got dirt roads. And dirt roads are a large part of our community. In fact, we're one of the largest areas all across the country for dirt roads because of that peri-urban nature. 70 years, Deputy Speaker, is how long it would have taken to seal all the roads in our community if it wasn't for the Roads for Communities program that the Coalition Government announced in 2019. $150 million to seal roads across my community. And unfortunately, the Albanese Labor government, in one of their first acts of government, was to rip up that funding. $100 million pulled out of my community, despite the project being delivered on time and on budget, despite the department confirming in Senate estimates that it was delivering safety benefits for the community, despite the Prime Minister, who was the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure at the time, committing Labor to the 10-year program, and I quote, to build the safe roads our community needs. Despite all this, Labor backflipped. They broke their promise, they broke their word to our community. And when I'm in the hills in particular, or the Upper Yarra Hills, or these areas that have dirt roads, it's something people continually raise with me. And my commitment to them is that I'll continue to fight to get this funding reinstated. I'll hold this government to account for their broken promise, and I'll make sure that we get the roads that we deserve so we can drive safely, so our brilliant agricultural products can get taken to market and the quality can be protected. And while we've got frustrations that we're fighting on, when it comes to roads, we have had some significant wins. Now, this government put every infrastructure project in the country on the chopping block when they were elected, including Killara Road and the Montrose Canterbury Road roundabout upgrade. But as a community, we stood together and we said that we wouldn't accept it. And I want to thank all of those that attended my community forums, added their voice to the petition to make sure that that funding was not cut. And we were successful in those campaigns. And the Montrose upgrade is going ahead right now, but I want to acknowledge, Deputy Speaker, that that upgrade is causing significant challenges for the small businesses in those communities, but also residents. And we know that's part of the challenges of a significant infrastructure project. So I want to urge locals to support those shops in Montrose where you can, and continue to urge the State Labor government, as I have been since the project started, to get the project completed as soon as possible so those businesses can get back to normal. But in Coldstream, in Killara Road, a significant and dangerous road and intersection, the state government committed that they would get the works started and pre-works and consultation would be completed by 2024. We were now 3 to 4 months from the end of 2024. No pre-works have started, no consultation with the community has started. So again, this funding was given to state Labor in 2019. They committed at the start of this year that they would get it completed, or they would get the pre-works and the consultation completed by the end of this year for the works to start in 2025. And it's about time Labor got on with it and got it delivered, because we deserve safer roads. That funding is with the government in Victoria. They have to get it done. Now, roads are a crucial issue, but another important and significant issue in my community is health services and access to health. And I thank those that have engaged with me about the challenges they have getting access to GPs and the increased cost and availability, particularly, again, in an area where it's semi-rural, peri-urban. And the Coalition has a plan to increase GPs in rural and regional areas by working with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners to provide incentive payments, assistance with leave entitlements and support for pre-vocational training. It's so crucial we get access to the GPs that we deserve. An area, Deputy Speaker, that I'm passionate about, something I've spoken about since coming to this House, is mental health and mental health support. And this Thursday is Are You OK Day. It's a national day of action dedicated to reminding everyone that every day is the day to ask, are you OK? The reality is that many people aren't OK, whether it's cost of living or other pressures and challenges they face. And in my community, mental health is a significant issue. 16,047 people from the Yarra Ranges, which mirrors the seat of Casey, reported experience a mental health challenge on the last census. Now, for context, that's almost 20% higher than the national average. And at my recent Community Leaders Forum, with over 60 local community leaders, they identified mental health challenges as one of our key issues, and that, as I quote, people are slipping through the cracks, and it is expensive to see a mental health practitioner. And I'm proud to be part of a coalition that is committed to increasing the Medicare subsidised mental health sessions from 10 back to 20, after the Albanese government ignored a report that said it should stay at 20 and cut it from 20 back to 10. And I was talking to a resident at the Callista Market just this Saturday, Deputy Speaker, and she was sharing the heartbreaking story of her son who got those 10 sessions, and they're now having to find the money because he has significant challenges and the financial pressure at $280 a session that it is putting on them. And that's why everyone should deserve mental health services regardless of their financial situation. And it is a shame that this Prime Minister cut that funding and again has left the Australian people without the support that they need. At that market at Callista Village on Saturday, and at the recent Upwey Community Market when I was talking to Hills locals, the other issue that consistently came up, in addition to roads, mental health support, was telecommunications. It's an ongoing issue for our community, particularly in times of storms, but also every day. And the former Liberal government funded 9 towers all across our community, and in the lead up to the election, I was proud to commit to towers at Menzies Creek and Sylvan, which are being developed. But more needs to be done. With the last round of pump funding, my community, despite being regional and rural, was not included in that program, in that definitions. I've written to the Minister for Communications, I've engaged with her about it, and I urge her to make sure that eligibility for future funding rounds ensures that our community is considered the regional rural community that it is, and that it gets the telecommunications that it deserves every day and in emergencies. And I thank everyone in my community who has reached out to me, has shared their concerns, shared their thoughts. It's been a pleasure over 2.5 years to work with them to proactively solve the challenges we face as a community.
And I thank the member for Casey for his contribution. The question before the Federation Chamber is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I take this opportunity today to speak on a matter of particular interest and significant to constituents in my electorate of Lingiari concerning the state of tourism in the Northern Territory. In 2017-18, the Northern Territory welcomed 1.7 million visitors, of which approximately 16% came from overseas, with the remainder travelling from interstate or within the Northern Territory. Tourism is one of our important sectors, contributing $2.6 billion to the Northern Territory economy and delivering huge financial and lifestyle benefits. Around 6,900 people are directly employed across the Northern Territory in tourism and hospitality, with a further 12,500 people indirectly employed. Aboriginal cultural tourism is a key driver for this thriving industry, contributing around $383 million to the Territory economy and employing over 1,400 workers. Just on 80% of tourist visitors believe the Northern Territory is the destination of choice to connect with Aboriginal culture. Tourism is one of 5 core growth sectors to propel the Northern Territory's economy in the long term. Since 2020 COVID travel restrictions, tourist visitation numbers and expenditure has dropped markedly in key regions across the Northern Territory, in particular in my electorate of Lingiari. The Alice Springs and Macdonnell Ranges and the Barkly region recorded the highest drops in June 2022, with visitation numbers falling just under 50% and tourism expenditure reducing by between 45% and 80% across the region. This trend, Deputy Speaker, is similar for the same period in the Katherine and Big Rivers region, which recorded a drop of 24% in visitor numbers and 30% in tourism expenditure. The Greater Darwin region recorded the smallest drop, reducing by 16% in visitation numbers and 18% in expenditure. Only the Lassiter region recorded an increase in tourist visitor numbers and expenditure, reporting a 25% and 28% increase respectively. There are many factors contributing to these significant drops in current demand in the visitor market across tourism in the Northern Territory. The COVID travel restrictions, local labour shortages hindered many operators' ability to take full advantage of this growth in demand. More work is required to train a local tourism workforce, particularly Aboriginal people who can engage directly with overseas visitors on culture and country. Aviation is another hot topic impacting on the tourism industry in the Northern Territory. A key priority for the Territory is ensuring sustainable and affordable aviation services that connect Territorians with the rest of Australia and the world to make the Territory accessible to visitors. But recent law and order and community safety issues that led to 2 curfews in Alice Springs were deeply disturbing and totally unacceptable. The negative media resulting from this violence has been extremely damaging to the local tourism industry and its workforce, causing immeasurable brand damage. Tourism Central Australia estimates that the ongoing law and order issues and the resulting negative media have had a sustained impact on the financial viability of many tourist operators, both in Alice Springs, Central Australia and the Barkly region, leading to increased booking cancellations and substantially reduced profit margins. There's a number of closures, Deputy Speaker, but as a federal member, I have certainly said to Tourism Central Australia, I will continue to provide my strong support and advocacy to help this sector recover and rebuild its brand. While the outlook for tourism in the Northern Territory remains uncertain, I'm impressed by the resilience of local operators as they take every opportunity to keep competitive. I congratulate the Minister for Tourism, the Honourable Don Farrell, for taking the time during his recent visit to Yulara to meet with the delegation of Central Australian tourism operators and to hear firsthand the issues and challenges they are facing. This group greatly appreciated the time and understanding shown by Minister Farrell for their situation. I will continue to work with Minister Farrell's office in advocating for immediate relief to enable this immensely important industry sector for the Northern Territory economy to remain afloat. And I also look forward to meeting with the new Northern Territory Minister for Tourism and Hospitality, Marie-Claire Boothby, MLA, to see what strategies and fundings and solutions that we can work together with the new CLP government in considering and to looking at addressing the current problems confronting tourism in the Northern Territory and aiding its important recovery.
Thank you. The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise tonight to raise my ongoing concern about the treatment of family domestic sexual violence against women and children in Australia by governments, and the lack of what I would regard as legislative reform responses, I think, that are adequate and urgent enough to meet the challenge that we all know in this chamber and in this House that we face. I do want to recognise the government for its 6 September release following National Cabinet in relation to the $4.4 billion further commitments to National Access to Justice Partnership and the shared goals under the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children. And I do recognise the value that extra money and additional money for services can have, and the important role that it will play in all of the different facets that the National Cabinet decided on, including 5-year national partnership agreements and enhancing and expanding child-centric trauma centres, and the development of national evidence-based standards for men's behaviour change programs. These are all worthy initiatives and all very good initiatives. What also is needed, in my opinion, and in the opinion of very many, is reforms in all of the different facets of Commonwealth and state legislation that enable much of the family, domestic and sexual violence against women, including in the area of financial services and financial reform, which is one of the most prevalent kinds of domestic and family abuse that gets too little attention in much of the headline funding and other necessary things that need to be done. And I do want to speak to briefly the work of Catherine Fitzpatrick, the founder and director of Flequity Ventures, and the important work that she's been doing in relation to financial reviews and a regulatory reform framework, something that is actually the domain of government to do. Not just funding or service provision, which is very important and will certainly make a difference, but also the actual reform of the laws and the financial system that will prevent many of the people who want to perpetrate these things from even occurring in the first place, give women recourse to safety and allow them to go somewhere and deal with it rather than meet the roadblocks that they face when they come to their banks, financial institutions, and the treatment that happens in family and domestic violence. And taking up some of the recommendations that she's made, I would also endorse to government the great role of Commonwealth legislative change in relation to financial services and financial sectors. And that first thing would be treating financial abuse as financial crime. It sounds simple, but financial abuse of women is not treated as a financial crime. And that is a fundamental legal reform. That is what a parliament should do first. Because if you treat it as a crime under the Crimes Act, you completely invert the treatment of the behaviour by all of our agencies, whether it be police, whether it be investigative agencies, whether it be all of our ombudsmen and other sectors. And that is a fundamental flaw, a historic flaw in the construction of our laws and legislation. At the moment, as we know, the tactics and impact of financial abuse are consistent with those of financial crimes. The government has done a lot of work recently in promotion on scams, frauds and thefts, but domestic and family financial abuse isn't treated in the same way. This seems simple, but this is 2024 and we still haven't treated financial abuse as financial crime in a domestic and family violence context. Establishing things like a financial abuse accord, similar to the cross-sector public-private partnerships for scams, responses to protect customers and financial abuse systems, mechanisms, and applying similar criminal penalties as we do to scams and as we do to other things. These simple measures would actually prevent physical violence from occurring, because we know the steps and the stages of abuse centre around things like financial abuse for many years before physical abuse might happen. Sometimes they'll happen in a complementary way altogether. Sometimes, we see in some of the more serious examples recently, like Molly Ticehurst, pattern-like behaviour where a partner's pet or cherished
animal is killed in advance as kind of a warning that is ignored by agencies as well. One of those warning signs is financial abuse, and financial abuse can happen for many years and it isn't treated as a crime still, even to this day. So something very simple that the government can take up and reform. Another recommendation that the faculty report has come up with, which again makes absolute sense, is apply financial safety by design principles to products and services. And that's financial products and services we're talking about here, safety by design. And we still know today that when women try to engage, if they're the joint holder of an account, once one partner has changed and they're locked out of the account, the financial service provider can't do anything about it. Like, we don't have safety by design built in, so we don't have a way of enabling and empowering our financial service institutions from dealing with those things. So safety by design, and there's plenty of bodies of work being done on this, can be done by reimagining all of our financial services products to understand realities of what goes on with financial abuse in these situations. So again, not things that that government has to fund or do things necessarily, but work that can be done through legal and fiscal reforms that will actually make a practical difference. And I commend this work very much to the government, lifting the bar on customer service. And we have heard recently from many banks about how they do monitor, for example, messages in transfers between parties. They actually can monitor key words, like abusive words, abuse, and actually the only problem is they only actually then identify abusive words and texts that are sent between partners as they transfer money. They can only send them like a warning letter or a warning message saying, hey, you shouldn't be abusing that other person in this way, and, you know, we note your behaviour. But when we've asked, for example, how many customers have you kicked out of the bank, well, the numbers are like 1 or 2, but yet we know that we can detect through technology abuse occurring, and banks are unable to do anything about that. Again, financial abuse, a precursor in many cases, or an ongoing continuation of family or domestic violence. A comprehensive financial safety review of the regulatory framework around fiscal services we're talking about here, and that includes the regulatory framework to specifically include domestic financial abuse and recognise the risks of misuse of the financial system. And this has, I think, some areas. Relevant laws might include, for our note and members' note, the National Consumer Credit Protection Act, the Privacy Act. The Privacy Act, which I am an advocate for privacy and always have been, but the Privacy Act ought not to act as the barrier it does into family and domestic violence. So you treat it as a crime up front, you reform the financial services system, and then, of course, we look at all these acts, including the Privacy Act, to take out the nonsense that we should consider a perpetrator's privacy, for the example like the bank uses, where they can detect abuse happening in writing through the technology, but then privacy laws prevent them from dealing with these things in a way that might be sufficient. And given that we know that these people are particularly violent and abusive, then we're talking about a small percentage, but still the Privacy Act prevents. And so we haven't seen sensible amendments to the Privacy Act in this regard, I think, for a very, very long time. The Australian Securities ASIC Act, obviously, the Insurance Contracts Act, legislation and statutory instruments for superannuation, and state and territory laws and regulations, obviously. But for our jurisdiction, plenty of acts that we can be looking into now, including the ASIC Act, and we know company directorships, we know how abusers will use company directorships, especially within relationships, to abuse women in particular. It's a common occurrence for all members here when they've come across this, and yet we still don't have, from any government, a set of comprehensive reforms of the ASIC Act and of company directorships, and in a way that will take into account the realities of modern financial abuse. So I do commend the government, and I have no criticism of the government's funding announcement and the National Cabinet for doing its work, but funding is one part of the important arrangements that we need to make to do our best against the ongoing scourge of family and domestic violence. One of the critical components that we must consider in this Parliament and in the future will be financial abuse reforms. It will do a lot for a lot of women and a lot of children who face regular financial abuse. And financial abuse is as horrific as any other form of abuse in a domestic and family violence setting.
and we have laws that can be amended. We have a complete retreatment of these crimes in 2024. These ideas are sound. There is plenty of solid advice already, and I think the reforms, the will, the drive, the bipartisanship, I think does all exist for us to pursue this at this time. And so I raise that tonight with the best of intentions to say to the government, in the open spirit of cooperation, that here there would be a real willingness, I think, to make urgent reforms to the treatment of financial abuse of women and children in a way that would make progress in this very difficult area.
There being no further grievances, the debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. I call the member for Hasluck.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion, Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. Wednesday, the 11th of September 2024.